This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't believe what happened to us last month on our road trip through Nevada. I've been trying to write this down for weeks, but every time I start, I get this sick feeling in my stomach. But I need to get this out. My boyfriend Tom and I had been planning this trip for months. We'd saved up, mapped our route, and packed our Honda Civic with enough snacks to feed a small army. The plan was to drive from California through Nevada, Utah, and finally to Colorado to visit my sister. We were both excited to see the desert landscapes and take some Instagram-worthy photos. We'd been on the road for about 8 hours when we hit this stretch of highway in Nevada that seemed to go on forever. Nothing but desert and occasional scrubby bushes on either side. The sun was starting to set, and Tom had been driving since noon. I could tell he was exhausted. His eyes were getting that glazed look, and he kept adjusting in his seat like he couldn't get comfortable. "Babe, maybe we should stop for the night," I suggested, after he drifted slightly into the other lane for the third time. "You're tired, and we've got plenty of time to reach Salt Lake City tomorrow." Tom agreed reluctantly. He's always been the let's push through type, but even he couldn't deny he was beat. We'd passed a sign for the next exit saying there was lodging available, so we decided to take it. The exit led to this narrow 2-lane road that seemed to stretch into nowhere. After about a mile, we spotted this motel on the right side. It was one of those single-story places with all the rooms in a row and doors facing the parking lot. There was this huge neon sign out front that read Desert Oasis Motel, but the A in Oasis was flickering on and off, which gave the whole place this weird, unsettling vibe. I remember looking at Tom and saying, "Are you sure about this?" But we were both so tired, and the next town was supposedly 60 miles away, according to our GPS. Plus, it was already past 9 p.m. The motel looked run down, like it had seen better days maybe 30 years ago. The paint was peeling off the exterior walls, and some of the concrete was crumbling near the base. But the vacancy sign was lit, so we pulled into the empty parking lot. When we walked into the office, this little bell above the door jingled. There was no one at the front desk at first, so we waited, looking around at the dated wood-paneled walls and dusty fake plants. The place smelled musty, like old cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. After a minute or so, this guy appeared from a back room. He was tall and skinny with this greasy black hair slicked back. The first thing I noticed was how pale he was, like he never went outside, which seemed weird for someone living in the Nevada desert. He had this smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You know when someone smiles with their mouth but their eyes stay cold? It was like that. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft for how tall he was. Tom nodded and asked about rates. The guy said $49,999 for the night, which seemed reasonable enough. While Tom was filling out the registration card, I noticed the guy kept staring at me. Not in a creepy, checking me out way, but more like he was studying me. I don't know how to explain it. I told myself I was just being paranoid from all those true crime podcasts I listened to. He handed us the key to room 12, an actual metal key attached to this massive plastic keychain, not a key card like most motels use now. As we were leaving, he said, "Sleep tight," in this weird sing-song voice that made the hair on my arms stand up. "That guy was odd," Tom whispered, as we walked back to our car to grab our overnight bags. "Maybe he's just socially awkward," I said, trying to rationalize it. "Not everyone who's weird is dangerous." I was trying to convince myself more than Tom. We drove down to room 12, which was at the far end of the building. The door stuck a little when Tom tried to unlock it like it hadn't been used in a while. Inside, the room was basic but cleaner than I expected based on the exterior. 2 queen beds with these hideous floral comforters, a TV that probably still had a VCR attached, and a bathroom off to the side. Tom went to use the bathroom while I started unpacking what we needed for the night. That's when I noticed it. A dark, reddish-brown stain on the carpet near the bathroom door. It was about the size of a dinner plate, and no matter how I tried to convince myself it was just a coffee spill or something, my mind kept going to one place: blood. When Tom came out, I pointed it out to him. He kneeled down to look closer but didn't touch it. "It's probably just a spill," he said, but I could tell he wasn't convinced either. "Let's call the front desk and ask for another room." Tom called using the room phone since our cell service was spotty. The same guy answered, and Tom explained about the stain. The guy sounded annoyed and said it was just an old cleaning oversight, but all their other rooms were under renovation. He offered to send someone to clean it in the morning, but we'd be long gone by then. We debated whether to leave and try to find another motel, but it was late, we were exhausted, and the next town was an hour away. We decided to stay just for the night. Tom put a towel over the stain so we wouldn't have to look at it. That's when I realized something else strange. We hadn't seen any other cars in the parking lot. For a motel right off a relatively busy highway, that seemed odd, even for a weeknight. "Where is everyone?" I asked Tom as I peeked through the curtains at the empty lot. "Maybe we're the only suckers desperate enough to stay here," he joked, but there was an edge to his voice. We tried to settle in, but neither of us felt comfortable. We decided to watch TV to distract ourselves, but the reception was terrible. Just static and glimpses of shows coming through the snow. Eventually, we gave up and tried to sleep, fully clothed on top of the covers of one bed, leaving the bathroom light on. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The digital clock on the nightstand was blinking 12 hours, like the power had gone out at some point. But what woke me was the sound of footsteps outside our door. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right in front of our room. I nudged Tom awake and put my finger to my lips. We both sat completely still, listening. Then came a soft scratching sound, like fingernails against the door. Not like someone knocking, more like someone tracing patterns on the wood. Tom got up silently and moved toward the window, carefully pulling the curtain back just enough to peek out. His face went pale. "What is it?" I whispered. "It's him," Tom mouthed, not making a sound. "The guy from the front desk." My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The scratching continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Then the footsteps started again, moving slowly away. We waited until we couldn't hear them anymore before we spoke. "We need to get out of here," Tom said, his voice barely audible. "Now." I nodded, already reaching for my shoes. We packed our stuff as quietly as possible, double-checking to make sure we hadn't left anything behind. Tom peeked out the window again to make sure the coast was clear. "I don't see anyone," he whispered. "Let's go." We opened the door as slowly as possible to minimize the creaking. The night air was cool and still. The parking lot was empty except for our car, and the office window was dark. The neon sign was still flickering, casting this eerie red glow across the pavement. We walked quickly to our car, trying not to make noise. Tom clicked the key fob to unlock it, and the car's lights flashed, seeming impossibly bright in the darkness. We threw our bags in the back and were about to get in when I heard a door open somewhere. I turned to look and froze. The office door was open, and the guy was standing there, watching us. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was completely expressionless, his eyes looking like black holes in the dim light. He didn't call out to us or move toward us. He just stood there, staring. "Get in the car," Tom said urgently, already in the driver's seat. I practically dove into the passenger seat, and Tom started the engine before I even had my door closed. We peeled out of the parking lot, gravel spraying behind us. I looked back as we turned onto the main road, and the guy was still standing there, watching our car disappear. We drove in silence for about 10 minutes, both of us too shaken to speak. Finally, Tom suggested we stop at the next place we saw that was open to call the police. About 20 miles down the highway, we found this 24-hour diner with a neon pie in the window. There were a few truckers inside, and the waitress looked surprised to see us at that hour. We ordered coffee we didn't drink and used the diner's phone to call the police. Our cell phones still had no service. The dispatcher asked us to wait there until a deputy could come take our statement. It was nearly 2 hours before he arrived. Apparently, the county was huge and sparsely staffed. We told him everything, and he took notes but didn't seem particularly alarmed. He said they'd send someone to check out the motel in the morning and took our contact information so they could follow up with us later. We got a room at a chain hotel in the next big town and barely slept. The next morning, we debated whether to continue our trip or head home. We decided to keep going, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. Around noon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. It was the deputy we'd spoken to the night before. His voice sounded different, tense. "Miss, I wanted to let you know we checked out that motel this morning," he said. "I think you and your boyfriend should come back to the station." We turned around immediately. At the sheriff's station, they took us to an interview room where 2 deputies and a state police detective were waiting. They told us they had found multiple blood stains throughout room 12 when they investigated, not just the one we'd seen. They'd gotten a warrant to search the other rooms and found similar stains in several of them, along with personal belongings that suggested the previous occupants had never checked out. The owner, the man we'd seen, had been arrested and was being held pending charges. They wouldn't give us all the details, but the detective mentioned they were bringing in forensic teams from Las Vegas and were treating it as a multiple homicide investigation. As we were leaving, one of the deputies told us, off the record, that they'd found a hidden room behind the office with things I don't even want to repeat. He said based on what they'd discovered so far, the guy had likely been operating for years, targeting travelers who wouldn't be missed immediately. "You two are lucky," he said. "Real lucky." We canceled the rest of our trip and drove straight home. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without checking the locks multiple times and keeping a light on. Tom's been having nightmares about that expressionless stare. The detective called last week to let us know they've identified several victims already, and that the guy, whose real name apparently doesn't match any of the motel's ownership records, isn't talking. They're calling it the roadside slaughterhouse case in the media now. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we'd fallen asleep deeply that night, or if we hadn't noticed that stain, or if we'd brushed off the weird vibes we got. I can't explain why he let us check in only to come to our door later, or why he just watched us leave instead of trying to stop us. Maybe he was toying with us. Maybe he was waiting for us to fall asleep. I'll never know for sure. All I know is that every time I see a motel now, especially one with a flickering sign, my blood runs cold. And I'll never again dismiss that feeling when something seems off. Sometimes your instincts are trying to tell you something your conscious mind doesn't want to believe. Amai veisi. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but it's been 3 months, and I still can't sleep without checking the windows multiple times a night. I need to get this off my chest in hopes that maybe someone else has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened to me. Back in April, I was on a business trip from Chicago to Denver. My company's travel budget got slashed this year, so instead of flying directly to Denver for my meetings, I had to drive. The route takes about 15 hours total, so I planned to break it up with an overnight stay somewhere in Nebraska. I'd been driving for about 10 hours straight that day. It was getting dark, I was exhausted, and starting to nod off at the wheel. That stretch of I-80 through Nebraska is mind-numbingly boring, just endless flat farmland and occasional small towns. After nearly drifting into the rumble strips for the third time, I decided I needed to stop for the night before I killed myself or someone else. The next exit showed signs for gas, food, and lodging, so I took it. There wasn't much there, just a gas station, a shuttered diner, and this place called the Night Watch Motel about a quarter-mile down a frontage road. It looked like one of those old-school single-story motels from the 70s with doors that opened directly to the parking lot. Not exactly five-star accommodations, but I just needed a place to crash. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 3 other cars. I pulled in around 9:30 p.m. and grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk. The office had one of those bells that ding when you open the door. The guy at the front desk looked half asleep himself. He was maybe in his 60s with thinning gray hair and thick glasses that magnified his eyes. His name tag said Earl. "Evening," he said, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Need a room?" I told him I did, just for one night. He had me fill out a registration card and ran my credit card. Room 17, he told me. It would be toward the far end of the building. When he handed me the key, an actual metal key, not a key card, he mentioned breakfasts from 6 to 9, just coffee and packaged muffins, nothing fancy. I thanked him and headed to my room. The place felt deserted. Most of the exterior lights were working, but a few were burnt out, creating patches of darkness between rooms. My room was second from the end, with empty fields behind the motel and the highway visible in the distance. I unlocked the door and flipped on the light. The room was basic but clean enough. Queen bed with a faded floral comforter, small TV, bathroom with a shower tub combo. The wallpaper was peeling slightly in the corners, and the carpet had seen better days, but it would do for one night. I dropped my bag on the bed, checked my phone, weak signal but workable, and decided to grab a quick shower before bed. The shower pressure was surprisingly good, and the hot water helped ease the stiffness in my back from driving all day. I was in there maybe 10 minutes, then dried off and changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants to sleep in. That's when I first noticed him. I was pulling back the curtains a bit to check if my car was visible from the room when I saw a man standing in the parking lot. He was directly across from my window, maybe 30 feet away, standing completely still. The parking lot lights created this weird silhouette effect, so I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I could tell he was staring directly at my window. Not just in the general direction, directly at me. I immediately let the curtain fall closed and felt this cold sensation wash over me. People don't just stand in motel parking lots at night staring at windows. I waited about 30 seconds, then carefully peeked through a tiny gap in the curtains. He was still there, hadn't moved an inch, just standing, watching. I checked to make sure my door was locked and the security chain was in place. It was. I considered calling the front desk, but didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe he was just another guest waiting for someone. Maybe he was smoking. But why stand in the middle of the parking lot instead of near his room? I decided to keep an eye on him. I turned off the main light in my room so he couldn't see me watching and peeked through the curtain again. Still there. This went on for almost 15 minutes before I finally got too creeped out and called the front desk. Earl answered on the fourth ring, sounding annoyed at being disturbed. "Yeah, this is the front desk." "Hi, this is room 17, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a man standing in the parking lot staring at my window. He's been there for at least 15 minutes now, not moving. It's making me uncomfortable." There was a pause. Then, "What's he look like?" "I can't really tell. It's dark. He's just standing there." Earl sighed. "All right, I'll check it out." I went back to the window and saw Earl emerge from the office about a minute later. He walked into the parking lot, looked around, then specifically walked to the area where I'd seen the man, but the man was gone. Earl stood there for a moment, looked around some more, then shrugged and went back to the office. My phone rang a minute later. "Nobody out there," Earl said. "Maybe it was just someone from another room having a smoke." I thanked him and hung up, feeling stupid but still uneasy. I double-checked the locks again, then tried to distract myself by watching TV. There were only about 20 channels and nothing good was on. I settled for some rerun of a crime show I'd already seen. About an hour later, around 11:30 p.m., I heard it, a scratching sound at my window. At first I thought it might be a tree branch or something, but there weren't any trees near my window, just the parking lot. The scratching continued, light but persistent. Scratch, 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 like fingernails on glass. I muted the TV and sat perfectly still, listening. The scratching paused, then started again, more deliberate this time. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't want to look. I really didn't. But I had to know what was making that sound. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept to the window and with one finger made the tiniest opening in the curtains to peek out. He was there, the same man, right at my window. His face was inches from the glass, eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at the spot where I was looking out. I could see him clearly now, gaunt face, maybe 40s or 50s, with sunken cheeks and these intense, almost yellowish eyes. But what terrified me most was his expression, completely blank, emotionless, yet somehow hungry-looking. When he saw me looking, his lips curved into this terrible smile, and he began scratching at the window more forcefully, with what looked like a small pocket knife or similar tool. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the bed. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice was such a contrast to my panicked state. Someone's trying to break into my motel room, I gasped, moving as far from the window as possible. There's a man at my window with a knife or something, scratching at the glass trying to get in. She asked for my location, and I gave her the name of the motel and room number. She told me officers were on their way and to stay on the line. "Is there somewhere in the room you can hide?" she asked. "It's just one room and a bathroom," I said. The scratching had stopped, but I could still sense him out there. "I think he knows I called you." The scratching stopped. "That's good. Officers should be there in about 8 minutes. They're coming from the county station. Is your door secure?" I confirmed that it was locked and chained. I also grabbed the heavy lamp from the bedside table and unplugged it to use as a weapon if needed. Those minutes waiting for the police were the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump. The ice machine down the hall, a car passing on the distant highway, the heating unit kicking on. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 10 minutes, I saw flashing lights through the curtains. The 911 operator told me the officers had arrived and to stay put until they knocked on my door. A few minutes later, there was a firm knock. "Police. Everything okay in there?" I checked through the peephole first. 2 uniformed officers stood outside. I unlocked the door with trembling hands, still clutching the lamp. They asked me to explain what happened while one officer searched the bathroom and checked the windows. The other took notes as I described the man in the parking lot and then at my window. When I finished, the officer who had been inspecting the room came back. "We can see some scratch marks on the outside of the window," he said. "Definitely fresh, but there's no sign of anyone out there now. We'll search the grounds and notify the night manager." They asked if I wanted to file a report, which I did. Then they asked if I wanted to leave, but it was after midnight by then. I was exhausted, and the nearest other motel was at least 30 miles away. They promised to patrol past the motel regularly throughout the night and gave me their card with a direct number to call if anything else happened. After they left, I pushed the dresser in front of the door for extra security. I knew there was no way I'd sleep, so I just sat on the bed with my back against the headboard, lamp still in hand, TV on for noise but volume low so I could hear if anyone approached my room. Every sound made me flinch. The ice machine cycling, footsteps passing by, which turned out to be the police checking in, as promised. The occasional truck on the distant highway. I kept checking my phone. 1:38 a.m., 2:22 a.m., 3:47 a.m. Time crawled. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard something that made my blood freeze. A soft humming sound coming from right outside my window. A tuneless melody, low and eerie. I sat perfectly still, hardly breathing. The humming continued for maybe a minute, then stopped. I didn't dare look. When the first gray light of dawn finally appeared around 5:45 a.m., I felt this wave of relief wash over me. I'd made it through the night. As soon as it was fully light, around 6:30 a.m., I grabbed my things, moved the dresser, and practically ran to my car. I returned the key to Earl, who was surprised to see me leaving so early. "Everything okay? Thought you were staying another night," he said, looking confused. I realized in my panic the night before, I'd completely forgotten I had actually booked 2 nights at the motel. I was supposed to rest up that day before continuing to Denver. "Change of plans," I said, not wanting to get into it. "Need to get on the road early." As I was about to leave, I hesitated, then asked, "Has anything like this happened before? Someone hanging around the parking lot at night?" Earl paused, looking uncomfortable. "We don't get many complaints." His evasive answer only confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. This wasn't the first time. "The police found fresh scratches on my window," I pressed. "Someone was trying to break in." Earl removed his glasses and cleaned them with his shirt, not meeting my eyes. "Look, every motel has its problems. This place has been here since the 70s. There have been stories. Local kids call it the Night Watch Motel for a reason, I guess." "What reason?" I demanded. He sighed. "Some folks claim there's someone who watches the guests at night. Been reports over the years. Police never find anybody. Most people think it's just an urban legend, something to scare travelers." He put his glasses back on. "I've worked here 5 years and never seen anything myself." I left without another word, got in my car, and drove straight to Denver without stopping except for gas. I ended up reaching Denver exhausted, but too afraid to stop anywhere else. That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've had trouble sleeping. I wake up constantly thinking I hear scratching at my windows. Sometimes I dream about those unblinking yellowish eyes staring at me through the glass. I've installed extra locks and security cameras at my house. I've also started seeing a therapist for the anxiety and paranoia I've developed. I had to make another business trip last month. I refused to stay at any roadside motels, only major hotels with interior hallways, multiple floors, and 24-hour security. I specifically request rooms that aren't on the ground floor. I've done some research since then. There are scattered reports online about the Night Watch Motel. Forum posts, obscure blogs, even a brief mention in a local newspaper article about highway hauntings. Different travelers describe a similar figure, a gaunt man who watches from the parking lot, sometimes approaches windows, but disappears before police arrive. No one has ever been attacked or hurt, just terrorized and stalked. The police never found anyone that night, and as far as I know, they never identified my watcher. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but then I remember those fresh scratches on the window that the officers confirmed. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted. Was he trying to rob me, hurt me, or just scare me? All I know is that I'll never stay at the Night Watch Motel again, or any place like it, and I always check my windows before going to bed. I've been putting this off for almost 5 months now. It's hard to type it all out, but my therapist says I need to process what happened, and talking about it might help. So here goes. This was supposed to be our big summer road trip. My wife Laura had planned everything down to the last detail, where we'd stop, what we'd see, even which roadside diners looked promising based on Yelp reviews. Me, I was just happy to get away from work for 2 weeks and excited to show the kids some of the national parks out west. We'd been on the road for 3 days when it happened. The kids, Emily, 14, and Jason, 10, had been pretty good about the long drives, all things considered. That day we'd covered almost 400 miles and everyone was exhausted. We were still about 2 hours from the next major town on our route when Laura pointed out we were all getting cranky and maybe we should stop for the night. The sun was already setting, and I hate driving unfamiliar roads in the dark. We started seeing those blue lodging signs along the highway, and eventually I took an exit when I saw a sign for Wayside Motel vacancy. It wasn't much to look at. Just a single-story, L-shaped building with maybe 20 rooms total, the kind with doors that opened directly to the parking lot. There was a small office at one end with a flickering neon office sign and one of those open signs hanging in the window. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, but it was clean enough from what we could tell pulling in. I remember Laura giving me that look, the one that said, "Really? This place?" But we were all tired, and the kids were already asking about Wi-Fi and if there was a pool. I told them not to get their hopes up on either count. The office had that musty smell old motels get, wood paneling, a bell on the counter, outdated travel brochures in a dusty rack. The manager was this older guy, probably in his 60s, with gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. His name tag said, Bill. He seemed nice enough, making small talk about where we were headed while running my credit card. We got room 12, near the middle of the L. Bill mentioned there were only a few other guests that night, a couple of traveling salesmen and some guy on a motorcycle tour. The place was pretty dead. He gave us our key, an actual key, not a key card, and pointed us toward our room. The room was basic but clean. 2 queen beds with those stiff floral bedspreads you see in cheap motels. A TV that still had actual buttons on it. A bathroom with those tiny soaps wrapped in paper. The AC unit under the window rattled loudly, but at least it worked. We brought in our bags and the kids immediately started arguing over which bed they'd share. Laura was checking the sheets, she always does that, while I was bringing in the last of our stuff from the car. It was fully dark by then, around 9:30 p.m. We ordered pizza from the only place that would deliver out there. I remember thinking how quiet it was, just the occasional car passing on the highway, the buzz of insects outside, and that rattling AC. We ate sitting on the beds watching some game show on the ancient TV, normal family stuff. Emily was texting her friends, complaining about the weak cell signal. Jason was playing his Switch. Laura was looking at tomorrow's route on her iPad. It was around 11 when we heard the first knock. I assumed it was Bill dropping off extra towels or something, so I didn't think twice about opening the door. That's when everything changed. 3 men pushed their way in the second I cracked the door. They all wore ski masks, black, pulled down over their faces with just the eyes and mouth visible. The first guy had a gun pointed right at my face, not a small handgun, but something bigger, more serious. I'll never forget staring down that barrel. "Everyone shut up and do exactly what we say," the first guy growled. He was taller than the others, muscular build. The leader, clearly. Laura screamed, and Emily started crying immediately. Jason just froze, his game still beeping in his hands. I raised my hands instinctively, trying to stay calm while my heart was about to explode out of my chest. "Please," I said, "take our money, take whatever you want. Just don't hurt my family." The second guy, shorter and twitchy, closed the door behind them and quickly pulled the curtains shut. The third guy, heavier set, started checking the bathroom and closet areas like he was making sure no one else was there. "Sit down, all of you," the leader ordered, gesturing with his gun toward one of the beds. Laura gathered the kids and they huddled together on the edge of the bed, Emily sobbing and Jason gone completely silent, eyes wide with terror. "We're not here to rob you," the leader said. "We just need a place to lay low for a few hours." That's when I noticed their clothes were dirty, and the tall one had what looked like dried blood on his sleeve. They were breathing hard like they'd been running. The twitchy one started rifling through our bags, while the heavy one pulled out a roll of duct tape. My stomach dropped. "Hands behind your back," the heavy one said to me, tearing off a strip of tape. When I hesitated, the leader pressed the gun to my temple. I'll never forget how cold the metal felt against my skin. They taped my wrists together behind my back, then used more tape to secure my ankles. They pushed me into the bathroom and made me sit on the toilet lid. Then the leader stayed with me while the other 2 went back to the main room. I could hear Laura trying to comfort the kids, her voice breaking as she tried to sound brave. "Please," I begged the leader. "They're just kids." "Shut up," he snapped. "No one's going to hurt your precious family if everyone behaves." Through the partially opened door, I could see the twitchy guy pacing by the window, occasionally peeling back the curtain to look outside. The heavy one was sitting on the edge of the other bed, his gun resting on his lap. "How long until Jimmy gets here?" the heavy one asked. "He said 2 hours, maybe 3, the leader replied from the bathroom doorway. "Depends on if he got the car." "I don't like this," the twitchy one muttered. "We should have stuck to the plan." "The plan went to shit when that guard pulled his weapon," the leader snapped. "This is the new plan." They argued in hushed voices for a while. I gathered they had robbed something, a store, maybe a bank, and things had gone wrong. Someone got shot. They were waiting for someone named Jimmy to pick them up with a getaway car. I kept working my wrists against the tape, trying to create some slack. The tape was stretched tight, but I could feel it giving just a little each time I pulled. The leader would occasionally walk out to check with his buddies, and each time he did, I worked harder at the tape. About an hour into this nightmare, there was another knock at the door. Everyone froze. "Housekeeping," came a voice. "Bill, the manager." The leader signaled for everyone to be quiet. After a moment, Bill knocked again. "Everything all right in there? Just doing a check." The twitchy guy looked panicked. "What do we do?" The leader thought for a second, then nodded to the heavy guy. "Open it, grab him, bring him in. Quick and quiet." It happened fast. The heavy guy positioned himself behind the door while the twitchy one opened it just enough. When Bill started to speak, the heavy guy yanked him inside and slammed the door shut. Bill barely had time to register what was happening before he was staring at 3 guns. "What the?" was all he got out before the leader clamped a hand over his mouth. "Not a sound," the leader hissed. "Understand?" Bill, wide-eyed, nodded slowly. Now they had 5 hostages. They taped Bill's hands and feet and sat him on the floor between the beds. He kept looking at us apologetically, like this was somehow his fault. The twitchy guy was getting more agitated. "This is bad. This is really bad. Now we got 5 of them." "Relax," the leader said. "Jimmy will be here soon, and then we're gone." "And what about them?" The twitchy one gestured toward us. There was a long silence. The implication hung in the air. Laura let out a sob and pulled the kids closer. "We're not killing anyone," the leader finally said. "That's not who we are." "Tell that to the security guard," the twitchy one shot back. "That was different. That was self-defense." They kept arguing, voices rising. The heavy guy kept saying they needed to calm down, but nobody was listening to him. The twitchy one was pacing faster now, waving his gun around carelessly. Every time it pointed in the direction of my family, my heart stopped. During this argument, I managed to work one hand partially free from the tape. My wrist was raw and bleeding, but I could almost slip my hand out. I just needed the right moment. That moment came when the motel phone suddenly rang, making everyone jump. The room fell silent as the shrill ring cut through the tension. The leader motioned for the heavy guy to answer it. He picked it up cautiously. "Hello?" "No, no problem. Wrong room, I think. Yeah, bye." He hung up and shrugged. "Front desk asking about a noise complaint." "Noise complaint?" The twitchy one's voice went up an octave. "Who would—" "Someone heard us," the leader realized. He turned to Bill. "Is there anyone else working tonight?" Bill shook his head. "Just me. Must be one of the other guests." The 3 men exchanged looks. "We need to move," the leader said. "Get everyone up." In the confusion of them trying to figure out what to do next, I managed to free my hand completely. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I stayed put, waiting for my chance. It came when the twitchy guy stepped into the bathroom to check the window there. The leader was focused on Laura and the kids, while the heavy one was watching Bill. I lunged forward, tackling the twitchy guy from behind. We crashed into the shower curtain, the rod coming down on top of us. His gun clattered to the floor. I heard Laura screaming, and then a crash from the main room. Through the bathroom doorway, I caught a glimpse of her swinging a lamp at the heavy guy's head. The twitchy guy and I were wrestling on the bathroom floor. He was stronger than he looked, clawing at my face, trying to reach for his gun. I managed to slam his head against the toilet bowl, and he went limp. I grabbed his gun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it, and staggered back into the main room. The heavy guy was down, blood streaming from his head where Laura had hit him. The leader had his gun trained on Laura and the kids, his eyes wild. "Drop it!" I screamed, pointing the gun at him with both hands. He swung toward me, and for a second I thought he was going to shoot. But something in his eyes changed when he saw his buddy unconscious behind me. "Laura, take the kids and run!" I shouted, never taking my eyes off the leader. She hesitated for just a moment, then grabbed each kid by the arm and made for the door. The leader started to turn toward them. "Don't!" I yelled, steadying the gun. "I will shoot you. I swear to God I will." He froze, then slowly raised his hands. "Easy, man, easy." Bill had somehow worked himself into a sitting position despite the tape. "The keys to my truck are in my pocket," he said. "Get your family out of here." Laura was already pulling the kids out the door. I backed toward the exit, keeping the gun trained on the leader. My hands were shaking so badly I'm still not sure how I didn't accidentally pull the trigger. Once outside, I saw Laura and the kids running toward the office. A car was pulling into the parking lot, just some random traveler stopping for the night. Laura ran straight to them, waving her arms frantically. I backed all the way to the office, never taking my eyes off our room door, terrified the leader would come bursting out at any second. When I reached Laura and the kids, the driver, a middle-aged woman who looked absolutely terrified, had already called 911 on her cell phone. "They're coming," she kept saying. "The police are coming." We huddled behind her car, watching our motel room door, the gun still clutched in my trembling hands. Emily was sobbing into Laura's shoulder. Jason hadn't said a word, his face blank with shock. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before we heard sirens. 3 police cars came screaming into the parking lot, lights flashing. Officers poured out, guns drawn, shouting commands. I dropped the gun immediately and raised my hands, shouting, "The criminals are in room 12. The manager is still in there." Everything after that is a blur. The police surrounding the motel room, more sirens, an ambulance, being separated and questioned. The looks on the officers' faces when they realized we were victims, not perpetrators. They caught all 3 men. The leader had tried to run out the back window but was met by officers circling around. Their getaway driver, Jimmy, was arrested 2 hours later when he showed up in a stolen car. We found out later they had robbed 3 convenience stores and a jewelry store 2 states over. The security guard they mentioned was in critical condition but survived. They were wanted in connection with a string of armed robberies across 3 states. The police put us up in a hotel in the nearest city that night, a real hotel with key cards and security cameras. None of us slept. The kids stayed in bed with us, all 4 of us huddled together, jumping at every sound. We cut our trip short and drove straight home the next day. I kept checking the rearview mirror the entire way, convinced someone was following us. Even now, months later, I still do that. I still walk through our house at night, checking the locks 3, sometimes 4 times. Jason barely spoke for weeks afterward. Emily had nightmares so bad we finally put her in therapy. Laura jumps every time someone knocks on our door. We haven't taken a road trip since. I'm not sure we ever will again. If we do, you can bet we won't be staying in any roadside motels. No more room keys, only key cards. No more places where the doors open directly to the parking lot, and I always check the security before we stay anywhere. Sometimes I still feel the cold metal of that gun against my temple. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I hear someone knocking at the door, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I see those ski masks and those cold, desperate eyes staring back at me. I don't know if we'll ever feel normal again, but we're alive, all of us. And I guess that's what matters in the end. I still can't sleep without checking the locks 3 times. It's been 8 months since that night at Pinewood Motel, but every time I close my eyes, I see that man falling to the ground. I've never posted about this online before, but maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. I was driving back from a work conference in Denver last August. My plan was to make it all the way home to Albuquerque in one day, but after 7 hours of driving, I was exhausted. My eyes kept getting heavy, and I knew I needed to stop. It was around 9 p.m. when I spotted the sign for Pinewood Motel, one of those faded roadside places you'd normally drive right past. I remember thinking it looked sketchy, but the vacancy sign was lit, and the next town was over 40 miles away. The parking lot was pretty empty, just 3 other cars spread out. The neon sign buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds. The office was this tiny room with wood paneling that probably hadn't been updated since the 70s. Behind the counter was an older guy, maybe in his 60s, watching a small TV. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Need a room?" he asked, already reaching for a key. I nodded, paid in cash, which should have been my first red flag. He didn't even ask for ID. And he handed me a key attached to this massive wooden keychain with the number 8 burned into it. He pointed me toward the far end of the single-story building. "Checkout's at 11, he said, and that was it. No paperwork, no nothing. My room was at the very end of the motel, kind of tucked away from the others. The door stuck when I tried to open it, and I had to shoulder it open. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. Ugly brown carpet worn thin in spots, a queen bed with a faded floral comforter that I didn't want to think too hard about, and a bathroom with yellowed tiles. But it had a lock and a bed, and that's all I needed. I remember setting my phone on the nightstand and hopping in the shower. The water pressure was terrible, but it felt good to wash off the day. I had just put on a t-shirt and sweatpants when I heard car tires on gravel outside. The headlights swept across my window as a vehicle pulled in. I didn't think much of it at first, just another late-night traveler, I figured. I was about to turn on the TV when I heard men's voices. They weren't exactly shouting, but they weren't trying to be quiet either. Something about their tone made me pause. "You said 8. It's fucking 10, one of them said, his voice sharp with anger. I moved to the window and pulled back the edge of the curtain just enough to peek out. The parking lot was poorly lit, with just one flickering light pole, but I could make out 3 men standing next to a black SUV maybe 30 feet from my room. The SUV was expensive looking, a newer model Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows. 2 of the men were facing my direction, though they weren't looking at me. One was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket. The other was shorter, stockier, with what looked like a shaved head. The 3rd man had his back to me. He was gesturing with his hands like he was trying to explain something. "That wasn't the deal," the tall one said. "We agreed on 8 kilos, not 6. My stomach dropped. I knew immediately what I was witnessing, but my brain didn't want to accept it. I let the curtain fall back and stood there frozen for a second. The smart thing would have been to just mind my own business, turn on the TV, and try to drown them out. But something made me look again. This time, the shorter guy was holding what looked like a duffel bag. The 3rd man, the one whose back had been to me, was now half turned so I could see his profile. He was saying something I couldn't hear clearly. Then everything happened so fast. The tall guy suddenly pulled something from his waistband, a gun. My heart practically stopped. The 3rd man lunged forward, and there was a struggle. I dropped the curtain and instinctively ducked down, just as a loud crack split the night air. The sound was unmistakable, even though I'd only heard gunshots at a shooting range once in my life. It was louder than in movies, sharper somehow. Then a second shot. My ears were ringing. I stayed crouched on the floor, my back against the wall, for what felt like forever but was probably only seconds. Then I heard a car door slam, an engine start, tires squealing. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand, but I forced myself to look outside again. The SUV was speeding out of the parking lot, its tail lights disappearing down the highway. And there on the gravel, illuminated by that single flickering light, was a body, a man lying face down, completely still. Even from that distance, I could see a dark stain spreading beneath him. Oh God, I just watched someone get murdered. I stumbled away from the window, tripping over my own feet. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call 911. But as I reached for it, I realized my terrible mistake. It wasn't on the nightstand where I'd left it. It was in the car. I'd taken it out to check directions before coming inside, and in my exhaustion, I'd left it in the center console. My car keys were on the dresser, but my car was parked right in front of the office, on the other side of the motel. To get there, I'd have to walk right past the crime scene, in full view of anyone who might still be watching. What if they saw me? What if they came back? I tried to think logically. The motel office would have a phone. The old guy at the front desk must have heard the shots. Maybe he'd already called the police. But what if he hadn't? What if he was in on it somehow? Why else would he be running a cash-only motel in the middle of nowhere? I couldn't just sit in my room and do nothing. Someone was dead outside my window. I had to call for help. But I couldn't use the front door. It faced the parking lot where everything had happened. I noticed a window in the bathroom. It was small, but I thought I could fit through it. The window was painted shut, and it took all my strength to force it open. It made a horrible scraping noise that sounded deafening in the quiet. I froze, listening for any reaction outside, but heard nothing. The window opened onto a narrow strip of land between the back of the motel and a line of scraggly pine trees. Beyond that was just darkness. I climbed through awkwardly, scraping my arm on a nail. The pain barely registered. Once outside, I pressed my back against the motel wall, trying to decide what to do. The logical move would be to stay behind the building and make my way to the office, but I couldn't see a path that wouldn't eventually lead into the open. The night was cool, and I was shivering, partly from the temperature, partly from fear. I could hear distant traffic from the highway, but the motel itself was eerily quiet now. No voices, no cars, just that body lying there in the lot. I decided to follow the back of the building, staying in the shadows. The ground was rough and covered with stones that hurt my feet through my thin socks. I'd left my shoes in the room, and there was no way I was going back for them now. As I crept along, I kept imagining headlights sweeping into the lot, the killers returning to clean up their mess and finding me instead. Every sound, a branch snapping under my foot, the distant howl of what must have been a coyote, made my heart race faster. I reached the end of the building and peered around the corner. From there, I could see the office about 50 yards away, its windows glowing with yellow light. Between me and it was an open expanse of gravel parking lot. I took a deep breath and ran, keeping low. The gravel crunched loudly under my feet. I expected a shout, a gunshot, something, but nothing happened. I reached the office door and practically fell inside. The old man was still there, but he wasn't watching TV anymore. He was standing behind the counter, his face ashen. "Did you hear those shots?" I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "I called the cops already," he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were trembling. "They're on their way. There's a dead man out there," I told him. "I saw everything. I saw who did it." He just nodded, like he wasn't surprised. "They said to stay inside and lock the doors. They'll be here soon." Soon turned out to be almost 40 minutes. 40 minutes of sitting in that office, jumping at every sound, expecting the killers to return at any moment. The old man, Bob was his name, didn't say much. He just kept looking out the window, clutching a baseball bat he'd pulled from behind the counter. When the police finally arrived, it was with a show of force. 3 cruisers, lights flashing, but no sirens. They secured the scene first, making sure the shooters weren't still around. Then a detective came to talk to me. Detective Ramirez was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a notebook that she filled with my statement. I told her everything I'd seen and heard. She asked me if I could identify the men, and I said I probably could recognize them but didn't know who they were. "You're lucky," she said when I finished. "These guys don't usually leave witnesses." Those words sent a chill through me. She must have seen it on my face because she quickly added, "Don't worry, we'll have an officer stay with you until we can get you somewhere safe." The next few hours were surreal. More police arrived. Crime scene techs set up bright lights that made the parking lot look like a movie set. They covered the body with a tarp before eventually taking it away. Officers knocked on the doors of the few other occupied rooms, questioning anyone who was there. I learned that the motel was known to law enforcement as a spot where drug deals sometimes went down. Its isolated location and cash-only policy made it attractive for that kind of thing. Bob swore he didn't know what was happening at his motel, but the detective seemed skeptical. Around 4 a.m., after I'd given a formal statement, they told me I could collect my things and leave. An officer escorted me back to my room. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Bed unmade, shower still damp, window still open in the bathroom. But it all felt different now, tainted. I grabbed my stuff and got out of there as fast as I could. The officer followed me to the next town, where I checked into a Holiday Inn with bright lights and lots of people in the lobby. Even at that hour, I didn't sleep at all that night. Over the next few weeks, I had to give more statements, look at photo lineups, the whole deal. They identified the dead man as Miguel Ortega, a mid-level distributor with connections to a cartel operating across the Southwest. The 2 men who killed him were never caught, at least not that I know of. Detective Ramirez called me a few times with updates, but eventually the calls stopped. I guess the case went cold. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, if they know about me, if they know what I saw. I moved apartments after everything happened, just in case. I still have nightmares about that night. Not just about the shooting, but about those moments afterward, crawling through the dark, certain that at any moment I'd feel a hand grab me, hear a voice, see the flash of a gun. I used to love road trips, the freedom of the open highway. Now I fly everywhere I possibly can. When I have to drive long distances, I only stop at major chain hotels in busy areas with lots of people around. I never stay on the first floor, and I always check that my phone is with me before I shower. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen a different motel that night, or pushed through the fatigue and kept driving. One small decision changed everything. I'm alive, but I'm different now, more cautious, more afraid. I can still see that body in the gravel when I close my eyes. I can still hear those gunshots echoing in the quiet desert night. I know it wasn't my fault, but I still feel responsible somehow, like I should have been able to do something more than just hide and watch. So that's my story. I don't know why I'm sharing it now, after all this time. Maybe I just needed to get it out. Maybe I needed someone else to know what happened that night at Pinewood Motel, where I watched a man die and crawled through the darkness, certain I would be next. I was driving back from my cousin's wedding in Nevada, taking the scenic route home to Portland. It was supposed to be a nice, peaceful drive through some beautiful country. I'd been on the road for about 11 hours and was getting pretty tired, so when I saw the Lakeview Motel vacancy sign glowing in the distance, I decided to stop for the night. The place looked pretty standard for a roadside motel. Single-story, L-shaped building with maybe 20 rooms, all facing the parking lot. There was a small office at one end with a neon office sign that kept flickering on and off. Behind the motel, you could just barely see the outline of what I assumed was the lake the place was named after, but it was too dark to make out much. I pulled into the mostly empty parking lot around 10 p.m. There were only 2 other cars there, an old station wagon and a pickup truck that had seen better days. The office was still lit up, so I grabbed my overnight bag and headed in. The guy at the front desk looked up when I walked in. He was probably in his 50s, with thinning gray hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. There was nothing particularly memorable about him, just your average middle-aged motel owner. He introduced himself as Frank. "Just passing through?" he asked, typing something into an ancient-looking computer. I nodded, explaining I was on my way back to Portland and needed a place to crash for the night. He seemed friendly enough, making small talk about the weather and asking if I'd driven far. Normal stuff. He gave me a key, an actual metal key, not one of those electronic cards, to room 17, saying it was one of their nicer rooms with a view of the lake. I thanked him, paid in cash since he mentioned their card reader was down, and headed to my room. The room was what you'd expect from a roadside motel. Outdated floral bedspread, worn carpet, small TV that probably still had a VCR attached. The bathroom was clean enough, though the shower had those rust stains that never seemed to come out. There was a window facing the lake, but with the darkness outside and the lights on inside, all I could see was my own reflection. I was exhausted, so after a quick shower, I climbed into bed around 11 p.m. and texted my mom to let her know where I was staying. The text didn't go through, no signal. I noticed there was a Wi-Fi network, but when I tried to connect, it kept saying, "Authentication error." Whatever, I'd text her in the morning. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but woke up around 2 a.m. to what sounded like a door slamming. At first, I thought it was just someone checking in late, but then I heard voices coming from the room next to mine, room 16. A man's voice, low and angry, and then what sounded like a woman crying. I tried to ignore it at first, maybe just a couple fighting, but something about the woman's voice made my skin crawl. She sounded scared, really scared. And then I heard a thud, like something heavy had fallen, and the woman's voice became muffled, as if someone had put their hand over her mouth. My heart started racing. I got out of bed and pressed my ear against the wall. I could hear shuffling, and then the woman's voice again, clearer this time. "Please, I won't tell anyone, just let me go." The man's response was too quiet to make out, but his tone was threatening. I heard another thud, and the woman cried out in pain. At this point, I was freaking out. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but still no signal. I tried the room phone, dead. I ran to the door, thinking I'd go to the office and call for help, but when I turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. I thought maybe it was locked automatically, so I tried using the key. Nothing. The doorknob felt strange, like it was turning but not engaging with the mechanism inside. I was locked in. I started to panic. I went back to the wall and banged on it hard. "Hey, is everything okay in there?" I shouted. Instantly, everything went silent. The voices, the shuffling, it all stopped. I stood there, heart pounding, listening. Nothing, not a sound. It was like they'd disappeared. I waited for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple of minutes. Then I heard a door open and close, footsteps outside, and then silence again. I ran to the window thinking maybe I could get out that way, but it only opened about 6 inches before hitting some kind of stopper. The gap was nowhere near big enough for me to squeeze through. I looked outside, hoping to see someone, anyone who might help, but the parking lot was empty except for the same cars I'd seen earlier. I went back to the door and tried everything, kicking it, using my credit card to try to slip the lock, even trying to unscrew the doorknob with a coin. Nothing worked. It was like the door had been sealed shut. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps approaching my room. Heavy, slow footsteps. They stopped right outside my door. "Hello?" a voice called. It was Frank, the motel owner. "Is everything all right in there? I thought I heard some commotion." I was relieved but still cautious. "The door's stuck," I called back. "I can't get out." "These old doors get jammed sometimes," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Let me help you with that." I heard a key in the lock and the doorknob turned. When the door opened, Frank was standing there in the same clothes he'd worn earlier, like he hadn't even gone to bed. He looked concerned, but there was something off about his expression. His eyes were too alert for 3 a.m. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking past me into the room. "I heard noises from next door," I said, watching his reaction carefully. It sounded like someone was in trouble. His face changed slightly, just a tiny tightening around the eyes. "Room 16? That's empty. Has been for days." I knew he was lying. I'd heard them clearly. "I heard a woman crying," I insisted. "She sounded scared." Frank shook his head, smiling slightly. "Must have been the TV from one of the other rooms. Sound carries strangely here sometimes." "My door was stuck," I said, changing topics. "I couldn't get out." "These old doors," he sighed, kneeling to examine the doorknob. "They swell with the humidity from the lake. Here, let me show you the trick to it." As he reached for the doorknob, I noticed something dark under his fingernails. In the dim light, it looked like dirt or dried blood. That's when his demeanor changed completely. As if he could tell I'd noticed, his shoulders tensed and his voice dropped. "Actually," he said, still kneeling by the door but now blocking my exit, "why don't you come with me to the office? I'll get you a different room." I stepped back. "No, that's okay. This room is fine now that the door's open." He stood up slowly, his friendly facade gone. His eyes were cold now. "I insist," he said, and reached for my arm. I jumped back, but he was quick for his age. His hand closed around my wrist, his grip like iron. I tried to pull away, but he yanked me forward, out the door. "Don't make this difficult," he hissed, his face now inches from mine. "You're coming with me." I screamed as loud as I could, hoping someone would hear, but he slapped his other hand over my mouth. I bit down hard on his palm, and he cursed, loosening his grip just enough for me to wrench free. But as I turned to run, I collided with someone else, a younger man I hadn't seen before, tall and muscular with a sleeve of tattoos. "Got a problem here, Frank?" he asked, grabbing both my arms from behind. "She heard something she shouldn't have," Frank replied, wiping his bleeding hand on his shirt. "Take her to the office." I fought like hell, kicking and screaming, but the younger man was too strong. He practically carried me across the parking lot to the office, with Frank following behind. Inside, the fluorescent lights revealed a scene that made my blood run cold. The office had been rearranged. The desk was pushed against the wall, and in the center of the room was a woman tied to a chair. She was in her 20s, with dark hair matted to her face. Her lip was split and swollen, her eye blackened. She looked up when we entered, her good eye widening with fear, or maybe hope. "What the hell is this?" I screamed, still struggling against the tattooed man's grip. Frank locked the office door behind us. "This," he said calmly, "is business, and now you're part of it." The woman in the chair started crying again, the same muffled sobs I'd heard through the wall. That's when I realized the rooms must connect through some hidden door. She hadn't been in room 16. She'd been moved from there to the office before I could get help. Frank pulled out his phone and made a call. "We've got a situation." "Yeah, 2 now." "No, nobody saw. Tomorrow night works." As he talked, I looked around frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. The tattooed man had forced me into another chair but hadn't tied me up yet. Frank hung up and turned to us with a sigh. "Change of plans. They're coming tomorrow night instead. We'll keep them both here until then." "Who's coming?" I demanded, though I was starting to piece it together. The isolated location, the mysteriously jammed door, the woman tied up. This wasn't just some creepy motel owner. This was something much worse. Frank ignored my question, instructing the tattooed man, whose name was apparently Ray, to secure me. Ray produced some zip ties from behind the counter. As he approached me with the zip ties, I noticed headlights sweeping across the parking lot through the office window. Frank noticed too and cursed under his breath. "Who the hell is that? We're not expecting anyone." Ray went to the window and peeked through the blinds. "It's a cop car," he said, his voice tense. Frank's face drained of color. "Did you check her for a phone?" he snapped at Ray. "She didn't have one on her," Ray protested. They both looked at me, and I realized what had happened. My text to my mom hadn't gone through earlier, but it must have sent automatically when I briefly got signal while being dragged across the parking lot. There was a knock at the office door. "Police, open up." What happened next is still a blur. Frank pulled a gun from under the counter. Ray moved toward the back door. The woman tied to the chair started screaming through her gag. I saw my chance and took it. I lunged forward, grabbing a heavy metal stapler from the desk, and swung it as hard as I could at Frank's head. It connected with a sickening thud, and he staggered backward, dropping the gun. I dove for it, but Ray was already coming at me. The police outside must have heard the commotion, because suddenly there was a crash as they broke down the door. "Police, freeze!" Ray changed direction and charged at the first officer through the door. There was a struggle, a gunshot, and Ray went down, clutching his leg. Frank had recovered enough to make a grab for me, catching my hair and yanking me backward. I screamed in pain as he dragged me against him, using me as a shield. "Stay back!" he shouted at the officers, backing toward the rear exit. "I'll kill her!" I felt something hard pressed against my ribs. He had another gun. The officers had their weapons drawn, but couldn't get a clear shot with me in the way. My whole body was trembling with fear, but somewhere in my mind, a voice was screaming that this was my only chance. As Frank continued backing up, I went completely limp, dropping my full weight suddenly. The unexpected move made him stumble, loosening his grip just enough. I twisted away and dropped to the floor as the officers shouted for Frank to drop his weapon. He didn't. I heard more gunshots and then silence. The next few hours were chaos. More police arrived, then ambulances. The woman from the chair, whose name was Melissa, had been missing for 3 days after her car broke down on the highway. She'd checked into the Lakeview Motel while waiting for a tow truck, and that was the last anyone had heard from her. As the night wore on, police searched the entire motel and made even more horrifying discoveries. There was indeed a connecting door between rooms 16 and 17, hidden behind a dresser. They found evidence of other victims in a shed behind the motel: driver's licenses, personal belongings, photos. Frank and Ray had been doing this for years, working with a human trafficking network that used the isolated motel as a collection point. They found records going back at least 5 years. So many names, so many people who had checked in and never checked out. The detectives said some of the victims had been sold into trafficking, others simply murdered and buried somewhere on the vast property. I gave my statement over and over to patrol officers, to detectives, to FBI agents who arrived the next day. They kept asking if I'd noticed anything suspicious when I checked in, if Frank or Ray had said anything revealing. But the truth was, there had been no red flags. Nothing to warn me that I was walking into a nightmare. They're still searching the property, still finding evidence. They tell me I'm lucky. If my text hadn't gone through, if my mom hadn't called the police when she couldn't reach me again, if the local sheriff hadn't decided to check it out himself instead of waiting until morning. I can't sleep without seeing Frank's face, feeling his hand around my wrist. I check and recheck my doors and windows every night. I can't stay in hotels or motels anymore. I'll sleep in my car if I have to. The FBI agent in charge of the case calls me sometimes with updates. They've identified some of the victims, reunited a few with their families. Others they'll never find. Last week, she told me they found another hidden room under the office. She didn't give details, but I could tell from her voice it was bad. Sometimes I wonder about the car I saw in the parking lot that night, the station wagon. Whose was it? Another victim who never made it out? Or just another traveler who got lucky, who checked out before everything went to hell? I don't know why I survived when so many others didn't. All I know is that every time I drive past a roadside motel now, I hold my breath until it's out of sight, wondering what secrets hide behind those numbered doors and who might be trapped inside, praying for someone to hear them through the walls. I've always prided myself on being a good judge of character. You know that feeling when you meet someone and something just feels off? I usually listen to that little voice in my head. But 3 months ago, I ignored it, and I nearly died because of it. I was on day 4 of a cross-country drive from Boston to San Diego for a job relocation. I'd been pushing myself hard, trying to make good time, and by early evening I was completely wiped out. This was somewhere in the middle of Arizona, one of those stretches of highway where the towns are so small they barely register on Google Maps. My eyelids were getting heavy. I needed to stop, but I was still a good 60 miles from the next proper city. When I spotted the sign for the Riverside Motel, I decided to call it a night. It wasn't much to look at, just a single-story L-shaped building with maybe 15 rooms and a flickering neon vacancy sign. The paint was peeling, and the whole place had this faded, worn-out look. But at that point, I just needed a bed. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 3 other cars scattered around. Next to the motel office was a small diner with a sign that read, "Riverside Eats," in the same dated font as the motel sign. My stomach growled as I realized I hadn't eaten since a fast food lunch 6 hours earlier. The motel clerk was an older woman with glasses who barely looked up from her crossword puzzle as I checked in. She just slid me the registration card, took my credit card, and handed me the key to room 8. No small talk, no "enjoy your stay," nothing. I remember thinking it was weird how quiet the place was. No TV sounds from the office, no music, just the hum of the vending machine outside. My room was exactly what you'd expect from a $49.99 motel. Stained carpet, a sagging mattress, and that musty smell all these places have. The air conditioner rattled like it was about to die, but it worked, which was all that mattered in the Arizona heat. I took a quick shower, changed clothes, and decided to grab dinner at the diner before it closed. The diner was nearly empty too, just an old couple in one booth and a trucker-looking guy at the counter. A bell jingled when I walked in, and I took a seat in a booth by the window where I could see my car. Force of habit, I guess. The only server was a middle-aged woman who looked tired beyond her years. She handed me a laminated menu without saying a word. The options were pretty standard diner fare: burgers, sandwiches, breakfast all day. I ordered a burger with fries and a coffee, figuring that was a safe bet. While I waited, I noticed a man watching me from the kitchen window. He was tall and gaunt with this weird intensity in his stare. Our eyes met for a second, and instead of looking away like most people would, he kept staring until I broke eye contact. It sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed it off. People are weird sometimes, right? The food came out fast, too fast, looking back on it. The burger looked decent enough, though the fries were kind of pale and limp. The coffee tasted burnt, but I was starving and exhausted, so I ate anyway. The cook kept glancing at me through the window. At one point, he came out from the kitchen on the pretense of wiping down the counter, but I could feel him watching me the whole time. I was about halfway through my burger when my stomach started to cramp. Not just normal indigestion, but sharp, twisting pain that made me wince. I figured maybe it was from eating too fast or road fatigue catching up with me. I paid my bill and headed back to my room, but by the time I got there, I was sweating profusely. The cramping was getting worse by the minute. I barely made it to the bathroom before I started throwing up violently. It came on so suddenly and with such intensity that I knew something was seriously wrong. My vision started blurring around the edges. I remember clutching the sink, staring at my reflection. My pupils were huge, and my face was covered in sweat. My heart was racing, and I felt this intense pressure in my chest like someone was sitting on it. I needed help. I stumbled to the bed and grabbed my phone, but my fingers felt numb and clumsy. I couldn't focus on the screen. The room was spinning, and every few minutes another wave of nausea would hit me. I managed to pull myself to the door and out to the office. The cramping was so bad I was doubled over, using the wall to support myself. When I reached the office, the same woman was there, still doing her crossword. "I need help," I gasped. "I think I'm really sick." She barely looked up. "Probably just food poisoning. Happens sometimes." The casual way she dismissed me felt wrong. This wasn't normal food poisoning. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode, and I couldn't stop shaking. "I need a doctor," I insisted. She sighed like I was being a nuisance. "Nearest hospital's 60 miles away. You want me to call an ambulance? It'll take at least 45 minutes to get here." Before I could answer, the cook from the diner appeared in the doorway behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, and his sudden presence made me jump. "Everything all right?" he asked, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the clerk. "This gentleman's not feeling well," she said with this weird emphasis I couldn't place. The cook's eyes met mine, and I swear there was something like satisfaction in them. "Sorry to hear that. What seems to be the problem?" As I described my symptoms, he nodded slowly, almost like he was checking items off a list. That's when the alarm bells really started going off in my head. This wasn't right. None of this was right. "I think I need to go to a hospital," I said, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "Like I said, it's 60 miles, the clerk repeated. "You don't look in any condition to drive." The cook stepped closer. "Why don't you go back to your room and lie down? I can bring you some tea that might help settle your stomach." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. Despite feeling like death, I mumbled something about handling it myself and staggered back to my room. I grabbed my wallet, phone, and car keys, not bothering with anything else. The walk to my car felt like miles. My vision was tunneling, and I had to stop twice to throw up in the parking lot. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them, before finally getting into my car. The cook was standing in the diner doorway watching me. He didn't move to help, didn't call out, just watched. I don't know how I managed to drive. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Every few seconds the road would blur, and I'd have to blink hard to refocus. I knew I needed to get as far away from that motel as possible. About 5 miles down the road, I spotted the lights of a gas station. I pulled in, parking crooked across 2 spaces. I remember practically falling out of my car and dragging myself to the door. The cashier, a young guy maybe in his 20s, looked alarmed as soon as he saw me. I must have looked like a walking corpse. "Call an ambulance," I managed to say, before collapsing against the counter. "I think I've been poisoned." That's the last clear memory I have. The rest comes in flashes. The young cashier on the phone panicked, lying on the cold linoleum floor, paramedics asking me questions I couldn't focus enough to answer, the wail of sirens, and then nothing. I woke up in a hospital room with an IV in my arm and a detective sitting beside my bed. At first I thought I was dreaming or hallucinating, but he explained they'd been investigating a series of suspicious illnesses linked to the Riverside Motel over the past 2 years. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to get sick after eating at that diner, but I was the first to make it to help in time to preserve evidence. The toxicology report showed I had ingested a combination of substances, including a heavy dose of some kind of mushroom toxin and what they suspected was drain cleaner. The detective explained they'd executed a search warrant on the motel and diner while I was unconscious. They found toxic substances in the kitchen and detailed journals in the cook's apartment above the diner. The journals documented what he did to people, what he'd tried to do to me. The cook, whose name I later learned was Elias Mercer, had been deliberately poisoning travelers for years. He selected victims who were alone, usually people passing through who wouldn't be missed immediately. He would watch them suffer, sometimes offering help that only made things worse. Some victims had died in their rooms, written off as heart attacks or strokes. Others had tried to drive for help, only to crash their cars due to the symptoms. The whole thing had been covered up by the motel clerk, his sister. The most chilling part was learning that Mercer had a viewing hole drilled into each motel room, hidden behind the tacky landscape paintings that hung in every room. He would watch his victims suffer, documenting their symptoms in his journals with clinical detachment. I spent 5 days in the hospital. The doctor said if I'd waited even 30 more minutes to get help, I probably wouldn't have survived. The poison had already caused some kidney damage, though they expected me to recover fully with time. The police found evidence linking Mercer to at least 7 deaths over a 3-year period. Some bodies were recovered, others never will be. During the investigation, they discovered he'd been suspected of similar crimes in other states, but had always moved on before authorities could build a case. It's been 3 months, and I'm still dealing with the physical aftermath: fatigue, occasional stomach issues, some lingering nerve damage in my hands. But the psychological impact has been worse. I can't eat at restaurants without paranoia setting in. I triple-check my food for any unusual taste or smell. I haven't been able to stay at a motel or hotel since it happened, not even chain hotels. When I travel now, I stay with friends or family. The case against Mercer and his sister is still being built. I've given statements, reviewed evidence, and I'll testify when the time comes. The detective told me they're still identifying victims, some going back almost a decade. I keep thinking about those moments in the diner, the way Mercer watched me eat, the satisfaction in his eyes when he saw me getting sick. He wanted to watch me die. He'd done it before, and if I hadn't gotten away, he would have done it again to someone else. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I'm back in that motel bathroom, my vision blurring, my heart racing out of control. I can still see Mercer's face, that calm, almost curious expression as he watched me struggle to stand, to breathe. I should have trusted my instincts when I first saw that motel. I should have driven those extra 60 miles despite my exhaustion. Sometimes the little voice in your head is trying to save your life. I'm never ignoring mine again. The locals now call it the Poison Inn. The motel and diner have been shut down, but the building is still there. A reminder of how close I came to being just another unexplained death on a lonely stretch of highway. It was late October, and I was driving through this small town about 4 hours from home. I sell medical equipment, and I'd been on the road for about a week at that point. I was exhausted and just needed somewhere to sleep before heading back home the next day. The Pinecrest Motel wasn't fancy, just your typical roadside place with dim lighting in the parking lot and those old-school physical keys instead of key cards, the kind of place that probably hadn't been updated since the 90s. The front desk guy was this middle-aged man who barely looked up from his phone when I checked in. He just slid me the paperwork, took my credit card, and handed me the key to room 214 on the second floor. I remember noticing how quiet the place was, only a few other cars in the lot. It was around 10 p.m., and I just wanted to shower and sleep. My room was exactly what you'd expect. Faded floral bedspread, slightly musty smell, a TV that probably still had a VCR attached to it. But it was clean enough, and I was too tired to care. I remember texting my boyfriend that I'd made it safely, then taking a quick shower before collapsing into bed around 11. I didn't even bother turning on the TV. I'm not sure exactly what time it was when I woke up. My phone said 2:47 a.m. At first, I thought something was wrong with my throat. It felt scratchy and irritated. Then I realized the air in the room felt wrong, heavy. I sat up and tried to turn on the bedside lamp, but in those few seconds I realized what was happening. Smoke. The room was filling with smoke. It wasn't just a little smoke either. I could see it now, thick gray clouds seeping under my door, getting denser by the second. The smell hit me hard. Not just wood burning, but something chemical and awful. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone and room key by instinct. I didn't even think about my suitcase or purse at that moment. When I put my hand on the door, it was warm. Not scalding, but definitely warmer than it should be. I'd heard you're not supposed to open doors if they're hot during a fire, but I also knew I couldn't stay in that room. The smoke was getting thicker, making my eyes water and my lungs burn. I pulled my t-shirt up over my nose and cracked the door open just a little. The hallway was worse, much worse. Smoke billowed through the crack, and I could see an orange glow coming from somewhere down the hall toward the stairwell at the end. The fire alarm finally started blaring, this piercing, relentless screech that somehow made everything more terrifying. People were shouting, doors slamming. I heard someone screaming for help from a room further down. I had to get out. I got down low, remembering something about smoke rising, and crawled out into the hallway. The carpet was rough against my bare knees, and the smoke made it almost impossible to see. My eyes were burning so badly I could barely keep them open. I started crawling toward the stairs, disoriented and terrified. That's when I saw him. A man collapsed in the hallway, maybe 10 feet ahead of me. He was on his knees, hunched over, coughing violently. His face and clothes were black with soot, and he looked like he could barely move. I don't know what made me do it. Pure adrenaline, I guess. But I crawled faster toward him. "We need to get out," I screamed over the alarm. He looked at me with these wide, bloodshot eyes. His face was streaked with sweat cutting through the soot. "Fire!" he gasped, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "It's revenge," she said. "Revenge." I didn't have time to process what he was saying. The smoke was getting thicker, and I could feel the heat intensifying. The end of the hallway where the stairs were located was starting to glow orange. We were running out of time. "Come on!" I pulled at his arm. "We have to move now." He was heavy and barely able to help himself, but somehow I got him moving. We crawled together toward the emergency exit at the opposite end of the hallway. Every breath felt like inhaling glass. My lungs were screaming, and my eyes were practically swollen shut from the smoke. I could hear crackling now, the actual sound of flames devouring the building. When we reached the emergency exit, I pushed the door open. The rush of cool night air was like being dunked in ice water after sitting in a sauna. We tumbled out onto the metal landing of the fire escape, both gasping and coughing. The fire escape was this rickety metal staircase that shook with each step. I helped the man down, practically dragging him at points. He kept mumbling things I couldn't make out through his coughing. We finally reached the ground, staggering away from the building. The scene outside was chaos. People in pajamas and underwear were scattered across the parking lot, some crying, others just staring in shock. The fire had engulfed most of the second floor by now, orange flames shooting out of windows, glass shattering from the heat. I could hear sirens in the distance, but they sounded so far away. I helped the man sit down on the curb at the edge of the parking lot. He was trembling all over, still coughing up black phlegm. "Are you okay? Do you need an ambulance?" I asked, though it was obvious he did. He gripped my arm again, his fingers digging in. "She was waiting for this," he wheezed. "Said the owner deserved it." Who said that?" I asked, but he just shook his head, overcome by another coughing fit. That's when I saw her. Across the parking lot, standing under one of the few working streetlights, was a woman. Unlike everyone else who was panicking or crying, she was completely still, just watching the fire with this look on her face. It's hard to describe, not exactly happy, but satisfied. She was probably in her 40s, wearing jeans and a dark jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. She didn't look like someone who'd just escaped a burning building. No soot, no panic, nothing. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was what the man had said, or maybe it was just the way she was standing there, so calm, while everything around her was chaos. But I walked toward her. She saw me coming and didn't move, didn't try to walk away. She just kept watching the flames with that same expression. When I got close enough, she looked at me. Her eyes were so cold, so empty, it made me stop in my tracks. "You did this," I said. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. She just looked back at the burning motel. "The owner of this place deserved it," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "He ruined my life." I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream for someone, for the police, but another part was frozen in place by her eyes, by the absolute conviction in her voice. "People are dying in there," I managed to say. Something flickered across her face. Not regret exactly, but acknowledgement. "Sometimes that's the cost," she said quietly. Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing between two buildings across the street. I should have followed her. I should have called out. But I just stood there, watching her go, my mind unable to process what had just happened. The firefighters arrived a few minutes later, followed by police and ambulances. The next few hours were a blur of oxygen masks, questions from police, and the terrible realization that not everyone had made it out. The fire had spread too quickly, trapping people in their rooms. It wasn't until dawn broke that I learned 3 people had died. I told the police about the woman, about what she'd said. They took my statement, asked me to describe her, but I could tell they had doubts. Why would the arsonist just hang around and confess to a random guest? It did sound crazy when they put it that way. But I know what I saw. I know what she said. The man I'd helped, I found out his name was Eric, and he was a long-haul truck driver, confirmed parts of my story. He told police he'd seen a woman leaving the utility room shortly before he noticed the smoke. He'd thought it was strange, but hadn't connected the dots until it was too late. As the day went on, more details emerged. The fire had started in multiple locations simultaneously, definitely arson. The owner, a guy named Frank Mercer, wasn't even there that night. He lived in another town and just came by occasionally to check on things. The night manager who'd checked me in was among the injured, suffering from severe smoke inhalation. I had to stay in town for 2 more days, answering more questions, giving statements. The local news did a story on the fire, calling it one of the deadliest arsons in the region's history. They interviewed me, but I didn't mention the woman. I don't know why. Maybe because I was scared no one would believe me, or maybe because part of me still couldn't believe it had happened. On my last day there, while I was waiting for my rental car to be delivered, my original one was damaged in the fire. I overheard 2 locals talking at the diner where I was having lunch. "Not surprised something like this happened at Pinecrest," one of them said. "Frank Mercer's been asking for trouble for years." "What do you mean?" the other asked. "You remember that girl who worked for him, the one who killed herself last year? Her parents were saying he was harassing her, threatening to fire her if she didn't. You know. And she wasn't the only one. There have been stories about that place for years." I wanted to jump into their conversation, to ask more questions, but I didn't. Later that day, I Googled Frank Mercer and Pinecrest Motel. There wasn't much online, just a few vague mentions in local news stories about allegations of misconduct that were under investigation. Nothing conclusive. But as I was scrolling through results, I found an obituary from the previous year. A young woman named Lisa Connor, 23, departed this world too soon. She'd worked at the Pinecrest Motel. The obituary didn't mention suicide, but there was something in the wording, a request for donations to a mental health charity in lieu of flowers. I don't know if the woman I saw was connected to Lisa Connor, a relative maybe, or a friend. I'll never know because the police never found her. The case is still open as far as I know. I've thought about that night constantly in the months since, about how the woman looked at the fire like she was watching justice being served, about the lives lost, people who had nothing to do with whatever Frank Mercer had done. Were they just collateral damage in her mind? "Sometimes that's the cost," she'd said. The coldness in her eyes still haunts me. I keep thinking I should feel nothing but horror at what she did. And I do, I really do. 3 innocent people died because of her. But there's this tiny part of me that wonders what Frank Mercer did to her. What could drive someone to such a terrible act of revenge? What happened to make her eyes so empty, so devoid of everything except that cold satisfaction as she watched the flames rise? I've never told anyone the full story until now. I'm still not sure if coming forward with everything I know would make any difference at this point. The woman is long gone, probably in another state by now. And sometimes at night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if she's watching another building burn somewhere, standing in another parking lot with those empty eyes, feeling that same cold satisfaction. The Pinecrest Motel is just a charred skeleton now. Last I heard, they're tearing it down, building a chain hotel in its place. But I don't think I'll ever stay in a motel again. Every time I smell smoke, even just from a barbecue or campfire, my heart starts racing, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see her standing there, watching the flames, completely calm in the middle of all that chaos. I just want to understand why. I want to know what could drive someone to that point. But I guess some things you never get answers to, no matter how much you need them. For a kichao ni. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night at Lakeside Motel. It's been 3 years, but the memory feels as fresh as yesterday. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what happened in room 107 changed everything for me. I was on a business trip to Clayton County, a small place I'd never been before. The company I work for had me visiting different distributors in the area, and after a long day of meetings, I was exhausted. I'd booked the motel online because it was cheap and looked decent enough from the pictures. Nothing fancy, just a place to crash. I arrived around 8 p.m., and the check-in process was normal. The guy at the front desk, I think his name was Rick, seemed nice enough. Mid-50s, balding with those reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He gave me my key, an actual physical key, not one of those card things, and directed me to room 107, toward the end of the single-story building. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a $65 the night motel. Faded floral bedspread that had probably been there since the 90s, a small TV, a bathroom that was clean but dated. The carpet had that weird smell that all cheap motels seem to have, like a mix of cleaning chemicals and something else I couldn't place. I remember setting my suitcase down and immediately testing the bed. It was surprisingly comfortable, and I was so tired I almost fell asleep right then. But I forced myself to get up, take a shower, and eat the sandwich I'd picked up at a gas station on the way. Everything was completely normal until about 11:30 p.m. I was half watching some crime show on TV and scrolling through my phone when I heard it. A loud bang from the room next door, room 108. It sounded like someone had slammed a door or maybe thrown something against the wall we shared. I jumped a little but didn't think much of it. Motels have thin walls and people can be inconsiderate. But then it happened again, louder this time, and then a third time. Now I was getting annoyed. I had an early meeting the next day and needed sleep. I turned up the volume on the TV to drown it out. But then I heard something that made me freeze. A man's voice, angry and slurred, shouting something I couldn't quite make out. The words were muffled, but the rage in his voice was unmistakable. My first thought was that it was some drunk guy fighting with his girlfriend or something. I didn't want to get involved, but the banging continued, getting more violent. It sounded like he was throwing furniture around in there. After about 5 minutes of this, I finally picked up the room phone and called the front desk. Rick answered, and I explained the situation. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no one in room 108, he said, sounding confused. "Well, someone's in there," I insisted. "I can hear them throwing things and yelling." Rick assured me he'd check it out. While I waited, the noises stopped. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall we shared. The silence felt strange after all that commotion. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Rick. Ms. Taylor, I've checked room 108. It's completely empty and locked from the outside. There's no one in there. I felt a chill run down my spine. That's impossible. I heard someone in there. They were banging on the walls and shouting. I don't know what to tell you. I unlocked the door myself and checked every corner of the room. No one's there. I thanked him and hung up, feeling uneasy. Maybe the noise had come from somewhere else and just seemed like it was next door. I decided that must be it and tried to focus back on my show. Around 1 a.m. I finally turned off the TV and tried to sleep. I was drifting off when I heard it, a light tapping on the wall beside my bed. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then tap, tap, tap again, a little louder this time. I sat up, my heart racing. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid immediately after. The tapping stopped for a moment, then started again, more insistent. It wasn't random. It had a pattern, almost like someone was trying to communicate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. I turned on the bedside lamp and stared at the wall. The tapping moved, tracking from one end of the wall to the other, like someone was walking along it, dragging their fingers across the surface. My mouth went dry. I reached for my cell phone, not even sure who I was going to call. That's when I heard footsteps outside my door. Heavy, dragging footsteps. They stopped right in front of my room. I held my breath. The doorknob rattled slightly, like someone was testing it. Thank God I'd used the security chain. A strange compulsion came over me. I needed to see who was out there. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. What I saw makes my skin crawl even now. A man stood there, but something was wrong with him. He looked disheveled, with messy hair and clothes that seemed out of place, like from another decade. An old-fashioned suit, rumpled and stained. But it was his face that terrified me. He looked furious, his features contorted with rage, and his eyes, they seemed to be looking directly at me through the peephole, which should have been impossible. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk again, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. Rick answered, sounding groggy. I told him what I'd seen, my voice trembling. "I'll be right there," he said, and I heard genuine concern in his voice. I stayed far from the door, sitting on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub. I could still hear the tapping, now moving between the wall and the door. Tap, tap, tap. It was like whatever it was knew exactly where I was hiding. 5 minutes later, I heard Rick calling my name from outside. I cautiously went to the door and looked through the peephole again. Just Rick this time, alone in the hallway, looking worried. I opened the door, leaving the security chain on, and peered through the crack. "There's no one out here, Ms. Taylor," Rick said, looking around. And I checked room 108 again. Still empty. "He was right here," I insisted. "A man in an old suit. He was trying to get in." Rick's expression changed slightly. He looked uncomfortable. "Let me come in for a minute." I closed the door, removed the chain, and let him in. Rick did a quick check of my room, looking in the bathroom and closet. Then he sat down in the desk chair while I perched nervously on the edge of the bed. "Ms. Taylor, has anyone told you about this motel before?" he asked carefully. I shook my head. Rick sighed. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but we've had a few complaints about room 107 over the years. Nothing dangerous, just strange experiences." My blood ran cold. What kind of experiences? Noises, feelings of being watched. A few people have mentioned seeing someone like you described. He rushed to add, "It's an old building, lots of pipes and settling noises, and people's imaginations can run wild when they're in an unfamiliar place." "You don't believe me," I said flatly. "I believe you experienced something," he replied diplomatically. "Would you like to change rooms? I can move you to the other end of the building." I almost said yes, but something stopped me. Moving to another room suddenly seemed scarier than staying put. What if whatever this was followed me? At least here I knew what to expect. "No, I'll stay. But if it happens again, I'm calling the police." Rick nodded and left, promising to keep an eye on the cameras pointed at the walkway outside the rooms. I locked and chained the door behind him, then pushed the desk chair under the doorknob for good measure. For about an hour, everything was quiet. I sat fully dressed on top of the bed, scrolling through my phone, looking up the history of Lakeside Motel. Nothing unusual came up besides a few bad reviews complaining about outdated rooms and spotty Wi-Fi. I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly to the most terrifying sound yet. A massive bang against the wall, like someone had taken a running start and thrown their entire body against it. The lamp on the nightstand fell over. Then another bang and another, moving around the room as if testing the walls for weakness. Then the shouting started. A man's voice, so clear I could almost make out words, but not quite, like he was speaking through water. The rage in that voice chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just angry, it was murderous. The banging reached the door, and suddenly the doorknob was turning violently back and forth. The security chain stretched tight, and the chair under the knob started to scrape across the floor. I screamed and called 911, backing into the corner of the room furthest from the door. The dispatcher kept asking me questions I could barely answer over the noise. The banging was now a constant assault, moving from the door to the windows to the bathroom door. Just before the police arrived, it stopped. Complete silence fell so suddenly, it was almost as jarring as the noise had been. 2 officers showed up within minutes. They searched my room, checked room 108, still empty, and looked all around the exterior of the building. They found nothing, of course. I must have looked completely terrified because one of the officers, a woman named Ramirez, offered to stay outside my door until morning. I accepted gratefully. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat in bed, staring at the walls, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. Officer Ramirez checked on me hourly, knocking lightly and calling my name. When dawn finally came, I packed my things and checked out immediately. Rick didn't charge me for the night, and he avoided making eye contact as he processed my checkout. I drove to a big chain hotel 20 miles away and slept for most of the day, missing my meetings. I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere with lots of people and bright lights. I tried to put the experience behind me, convincing myself it had been some kind of waking nightmare or stress hallucination, but I couldn't shake it. 3 months after my stay, curiosity got the better of me, and I started researching the history of the area more thoroughly. What I found makes me sick to my stomach. Lakeside Motel hadn't always been called that. Back in the 1970s, it was the Lakeview Residential Motel, a place where people would stay for weeks or months at a time. In 1978, a traveling salesman named Harold Wilson was murdered there, in room 107. According to the newspaper articles I found, Wilson had gotten into an argument with another guest. That night, someone broke into his room and stabbed him multiple times. He died trying to escape, crawling toward the door. The killer was never caught. The most disturbing detail: Wilson was described as wearing a dark suit the night he was killed. And the room where it happened? Exactly where my room had been. They had renovated and renumbered the rooms when they changed the motel's name in the 80s, but the layout was the same. I found a local paranormal investigation group that had documented several experiences at the motel similar to mine. Guests in room 107 reported aggressive knocking, shouting, and sightings of an angry male figure. The investigators believed it was Harold's spirit, still trapped in the moment of his death, possibly trying to identify his killer to anyone who would listen. I don't know what I experienced that night. Maybe it was Harold Wilson, endlessly reliving his murder and desperately trying to communicate. Maybe it was something else entirely. What I do know is that I will never stay in that motel again, and I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, my heart racing, convinced I hear that tap, tap, tap on my bedroom wall. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened at Clearwater Motel 3 months ago. I've been meaning to share this for a while, but honestly, I needed time to process everything. Even now, I can't stay in motels anymore. I'd rather sleep in my car or drive the extra hours to get home. So I had just sold my car, a 2015 Honda Civic that I'd babied for years, to this guy who answered my Craigslist ad. It wasn't ideal timing since it was already late afternoon, but he came with cash in hand and the price was right. $8,700 in crisp $100 bills. The bank was already closed, and I was still about 3 hours from home, so I figured I'd just get a motel room for the night and deposit everything in the morning. I spotted the Clearwater Motel sign just off I-40 around 7 p.m. Nothing fancy, just your typical roadside place with exterior doors and a neon vacancy sign. The parking lot was maybe half full, a few trucks, some cars with out-of-state plates. Normal stuff. When I walked into the office, this bell jingled above the door. There was nobody at the front desk, so I just stood there awkwardly for a minute or two. Finally, this guy appeared from a back room. He introduced himself as Bob, the manager. Mid-50s maybe, with this weird thin mustache and thinning hair combed over to hide his bald spot. He had on a polo shirt with the motel logo that was a size too small for his belly. Right away, something felt off about him. He kept staring at my purse, which, had nearly $9,000 in it, and asked way too many personal questions while checking me in. "Traveling alone, huh?" he said, not even looking at the computer screen where he was supposedly entering my information. "Where you headed? Business or pleasure?" I gave vague answers, saying I was just passing through, but he kept pushing. "That's a nice purse. Looks heavy. Got valuables in there?" He actually chuckled after saying this, like it was some kind of joke. I felt my grip tighten on my purse strap. "Just the usual stuff," I said, trying to sound casual. I handed him my credit card for the room, even though I had all that cash. Something in my gut told me not to let him see it. When he handed me the room key, an actual key, not a card, his fingers lingered on mine for a second too long. "Room 114, he said. "It's on the far end. Nice and quiet there." The way he emphasized quiet made my skin crawl. I thanked him quickly and hurried out. My room was at the very end of the building, around a corner from the main section of rooms. Great. The most isolated room in the place. The room itself was what you'd expect. Outdated floral bedspread, slightly musty smell, watermarks on the ceiling. I double-locked the door, used the security chain, and then wedged the desk chair under the doorknob for good measure. I wasn't taking any chances with all that cash. I remember sitting on the bed and calling my mom just to let someone know where I was. I didn't mention the cash, just said I'd sold the car and was staying overnight at Clearwater Motel off exit 287. She told me to be careful as always. After hanging up, I decided to count the money again and separate it into different spots, some in my overnight bag, some in my purse, and some in the inner pocket of my jacket, just being cautious. I was getting hungry, but something made me hesitate to leave the room. Instead, I ate some chips and a protein bar I had in my bag. Around 8:30, I took a quick shower. When I came out, I heard a knock at the door. My heart practically stopped. I didn't answer right away, just wrapped the towel tighter around me and waited. Another knock, louder this time. "Housekeeping," it was a woman's voice. "No, thank you," I called through the door. "I don't need anything." "Just checking if you need extra towels," the voice persisted. "I'm fine, thanks," I said more firmly. I heard mumbling outside the door, then footsteps walking away. I quickly got dressed, my hands shaking slightly. Housekeeping at 8:30 p.m.? That didn't seem right. Around 9, I was lying on the bed watching TV when I heard a key in my door lock. The door pushed against the security chain but couldn't open more than an inch or two. My blood ran cold. "Sorry," Bob's voice came through the gap. "Wrong room." The door closed again. I sat frozen on the bed, my heart hammering in my chest. Wrong room? The motel wasn't even half full, and I was at the very end. There were no rooms past mine he could have been trying to access. I turned the TV volume down and moved closer to the door, listening. I could hear footsteps outside, then voices. Moving as quietly as possible, I pressed my ear against the thin wall that separated my room from the next one over. "Tried already, but she's got the chain on." It was Bob's voice, speaking in a low tone. A woman responded, too quietly for me to make out the words. Then Bob again, clearer this time. "She's got a lot of cash. Saw it when she checked in. We need to move fast." The woman said something else I couldn't hear. "Master key didn't work with the chain on," Bob replied. "We'll have to wait until she's asleep." My entire body went cold. They were planning to rob me. Possibly worse. The isolation of my room suddenly made horrible sense. No one would hear anything. I backed away from the wall, trying to think. Should I call the police? What if they were listening? What if the police took too long to arrive? I needed to get out of there immediately. I glanced at the bathroom window, too small to fit through. The main window faced the parking lot, but opening it would make noise. The door was my only real option, but Bob and the woman were likely still nearby. Moving as quietly as possible, I gathered my things. I didn't bother folding anything, just stuffed everything into my overnight bag. I put on my shoes and jacket, slung my purse across my body, and grabbed my bag. Then I turned the TV volume up a bit and switched off the main light, leaving just the bathroom light on with the door partially closed, making it look like I might be in there or maybe already in bed. I stood by the door, listening. Nothing. I carefully removed the chair, trying not to make a sound. Holding my breath, I eased the security chain off and unlocked the deadbolt. The click seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Turning the regular doorknob painfully slowly, I opened the door just enough to peek out. The walkway was empty. I could see my rental car about 50 feet away. I slipped out and pulled the door closed behind me. Instead of heading directly to the parking lot, I went the opposite direction, around the corner of the building. There was a small gap between the motel and a fence that separated it from the neighboring property. I squeezed through and made my way toward the front of the motel, staying in the shadows. When I reached the edge of the parking lot, I crouched behind a dumpster and looked around. I could see Bob standing near the office, smoking a cigarette and repeatedly checking his watch. A woman in a housekeeping uniform, presumably the same one who had knocked on my door, was talking to him, gesturing toward the far end of the motel where my room was. My rental car was parked about 30 feet from them. There was no way to reach it without being seen. I considered making a run for the main road, but it was dark, and I had no idea what was beyond the motel property. Then I remembered seeing a rear exit from the parking lot during check-in. It led to a side street rather than the main highway. If I could circle around the back of the motel, I might be able to reach my car from the opposite direction. Staying low, I made my way behind the building. The back of the motel was poorly lit, with just a few security lights casting long shadows. I had to step carefully to avoid empty bottles and trash. Every small sound made me freeze. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the far end of the building. I peeked around the corner and saw my car, now about 20 feet away. Bob and the woman were no longer visible from this angle. I took a deep breath and moved quickly to my car, keeping my key fob in my palm to minimize noise. When I reached the driver's side, I unlocked it with a single press, wincing at the small beep and flash of lights. As I opened the door, I heard Bob shout, "Hey, stop right there!" I threw my bag onto the passenger seat and jumped in, slamming the door and hitting the lock button. Through the window I could see Bob running toward me, the woman close behind him. His face was contorted with anger. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. Bob reached my car and started pounding on the window. "Open the door!" he yelled. "There's a problem with your credit card." The woman circled to the passenger side, trying the door handle. When it didn't open, she started looking around for something, maybe to break the window. The engine finally started. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas, backing away so quickly that Bob had to jump aside to avoid being hit. His face in the headlights, that look of pure rage and frustration, is something I'll never forget. I spun the wheel and floored it toward the back exit, gravel spraying from my tires. In my rearview mirror, I saw Bob running toward the office, probably going for his own car. The side street connected to a main road after about half a mile. I turned onto it and drove as fast as I dared, constantly checking my mirrors for headlights following me. After a few minutes, I spotted a well-lit gas station and pulled in, parking right under the bright lights near the entrance. My hands were still shaking as I called 911. The dispatcher kept me on the line until 2 police cruisers arrived about 10 minutes later. I gave them my statement, showing them the cash and explaining everything that had happened. The officers took me seriously right away, especially when I mentioned overhearing them talk specifically about my cash. One cruiser stayed with me while the other went to the motel. About an hour later, the officer returned. They had detained Bob and the woman, whose name was Tracy. She apparently broke down immediately and confessed everything when questioned separately. What they told me next made my blood run cold. The police found master keys, duct tape, and zip ties in Bob's office. They also found a log of guests who had stayed at the motel, with notes about which ones might have valuables worth stealing. My name was circled with cash written next to it. But the worst part was learning this wasn't their first time. The officer told me they had been investigating a string of motel robberies across 3 states. The victims were all travelers staying alone, and several had been assaulted when they woke up during the robberies. Bob and Tracy had been working this scheme for over 2 years, moving from one motel to another before suspicion built up. They called them the Motel Bandits in the news later. Turns out they had dozens of robberies under their belt. Some of their victims lost everything: cash, credit cards, ID, everything. A few ended up in the hospital. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't overheard them or if I'd fallen asleep before they made their move. I spent that night at the police station giving statements, then stayed at a hotel in the city, a real hotel with interior corridors and electronic key cards. I barely slept, jumping at every sound. The next day, I deposited the cash and drove straight home without stopping overnight. The police called a week later to let me know both Bob and Tracy were being held without bail pending trial for multiple felony charges. That was 3 months ago. I testified at their preliminary hearing last month. The prosecutor says with my testimony and the evidence they found, plus Tracy's confession, they're both looking at 15-20 years minimum. I still have nightmares about Bob's face in my headlights. Sometimes I dream that my car doesn't start, or that I don't wake up in time to hear them at the door. I've gone through all the what-ifs 1,000 times. I know I got lucky. If I hadn't been paranoid enough to listen at the wall, if I hadn't acted quickly, I don't even want to think about it. Now I always stay at major hotel chains, always use credit cards, and I'll never ever travel with that much cash again. The weirdest part? Sometimes I feel like I'm still there, sitting in that dingy room, listening to them plan outside my door, like part of me never really escaped. I'm still struggling to fall asleep in hotels. It's been 8 months since that trip to Riverside, but the memories follow me everywhere. I've typed this out a dozen times, deleted it, and started over. Maybe sharing it will help me process what happened. I don't know. I travel for work about once a month, pharmaceutical sales rep. And this was supposed to be a routine 3-day trip to meet with some doctors at Riverside Medical Center. Nothing special. I'd done it 1,000,000 times before. The Westbrook Hotel is one of those mid-range business hotels. Not fancy, but clean and convenient. My company always books us there because it's close to the medical center. I'd stayed there twice before without any issues. I checked in around 4:30 p.m. after my flight was delayed. I was already tired and annoyed, just wanting to get to my room, order room service, and prep for my meetings the next day. The front desk guy was super chatty, asking about my trip while typing away on his computer. I remember being irritated by all his questions, where I was from, how long I was staying, but now I wonder if someone was listening. They gave me room 312 on the 3rd floor. The hotel is built in a U-shape around a central courtyard, and my room faced inward. Nothing special about it. Just your standard hotel room with beige walls, a king bed, desk, and that weird hotel artwork nobody ever looks at. After dropping my bags, I opened the curtains to check out the view. That's when I first saw him. Directly across the courtyard, maybe 40 feet away, was a man standing at his window, staring right at me. Room 327, according to the number I could see on his door. He was maybe mid-40s, kind of average-looking with dark hair and glasses. What caught my attention was how still he was. Not just glancing out his window, but completely motionless, hands at his sides, eyes fixed directly on my room. When our eyes met, he didn't look away or wave or show any normal human reaction. He just kept staring. Something about his expression made my stomach drop. This weird half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. I quickly closed my curtains, telling myself I was overreacting. He was probably just zoning out after a long day. People are weird sometimes, right? But I couldn't shake that feeling of unease. I ordered a salad from room service and took a quick shower. By the time I got out, I had a text from my boss asking for some sales figures before tomorrow's meeting. I sat at the desk with my laptop, trying to focus on work, but I kept glancing at those closed curtains, wondering if he was still there. Around 9:30, I gave in to my curiosity and peeked through a tiny gap in the curtains. His lights were on, but I couldn't see him. I felt stupid for being so paranoid over nothing. I went to bed around 11, double-checking the door was locked and putting the security chain on. I've always done this when traveling alone. My mom drilled hotel safety into me since my first business trip. I even put the desk chair under the doorknob, something I'd read in a women's travel safety article. Again, I felt silly doing it, but better safe than sorry. I fell asleep watching some cooking show on TV. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., but something had jolted me awake. The TV was still on, casting blue light across the room. Then I heard it. The distinct sound of my door handle turning. Not just once like someone making a mistake, but repeatedly, methodically. Someone was trying to get in. My first thought was housekeeping, but at 2 a.m., no way. Then the pressure on the door changed. I could see it moving inward slightly, stopped only by that security chain. Someone was actively pushing against my door. I froze completely. Have you ever been so scared that your body just shuts down? That's what happened. I couldn't scream or move or even breathe. I just stared at that door inching open as far as the chain would allow, creating a narrow gap about 3 inches wide. The chair I'd wedged under the handle hadn't done shit. It just scraped across the carpet as the door opened. I couldn't see anything through the gap from where I was lying, but I heard breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing. Then a hand appeared in the gap, male, with thick fingers and a large silver ring. It groped around, trying to reach the security chain. That's when my survival instinct finally kicked in. I started screaming, not words, just pure terror, and scrambled off the far side of the bed, grabbing my phone with shaking hands. The hand immediately withdrew, and I heard rapid footsteps moving away down the hall. I called the front desk, barely able to form words through my panic. "Someone tried to get into my room," I kept repeating. The night manager said he'd be right up with security. While waiting, I stood in the corner of the room furthest from the door, clutching my phone with 911 pre-dialed. I was trembling so hard I could barely stand, my mind racing with horrible possibilities. What if the chain had broken? What if I hadn't woken up? When the night manager knocked, I checked through the peephole before opening the door. He had a security guard with him, a tall guy named Marcus, according to his name tag. Marcus immediately checked the hallway, while the manager, Paul, tried to calm me down. "We'll review the security cameras right away," Paul assured me. But I could tell from his expression that he was taking this seriously, not treating me like some hysterical woman overreacting to a lost guest. Marcus returned, saying there was no one in the hallway, but they'd check all the stairwells and common areas. They asked if I wanted to change rooms, but honestly, the thought of walking through the hotel at that hour terrified me more than staying put. Paul offered to have Marcus stay in the hallway outside my door for the rest of the night, which I gratefully accepted. Before leaving, Paul asked if I had any idea who might have tried to enter. That's when I told him about the man staring from across the courtyard. Something flashed across Paul's face, recognition, concern, but he just nodded and said they'd check the cameras and see who was staying in that room. I didn't sleep another minute that night. I sat up against the headboard, lights on, jumping at every sound. Around 5 a.m., Paul called my room to say they'd reviewed the footage. Someone had indeed tried to enter my room at 2:47 a.m., but the hallway cameras hadn't captured a clear view of their face. Just a tall figure in dark clothing who knew exactly where the blind spots were. Chillingly, he confirmed that the room across from mine was occupied by a solo male traveler who had checked in shortly after me. That was enough. I started packing immediately, determined to check out at first light. I had meetings scheduled, but there was no way I was staying another night. I'd drive the 2 hours home between appointments if necessary. As I was throwing my things into my suitcase, my phone rang. It was my boss. I broke down as soon as I heard her voice, sobbing as I explained what happened. She was incredibly supportive, telling me to come home immediately and that she'd reschedule everything. I waited until 6 a.m. when the lobby would be busy with business travelers checking out. Safety in numbers, right? I called the front desk to have someone escort me down and help with my bags. A different security guard arrived, not Marcus, and walked me to the elevator. The lobby was busy, just as I'd hoped, with a line at the checkout desk. I stood waiting with my escort, scanning the room nervously. And then I saw him. Sitting in a lobby armchair, ostensibly reading a newspaper, was the man from the window. Same glasses, same dark hair, same build. He lowered his paper slightly as our eyes met, and he smiled. This horrible, knowing smile that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the smile of a stranger. It was the smile of someone who knew me, who had been in my space. I gripped the security guard's arm so hard he winced. "That's him," I whispered, nodding toward the man. "The one who was watching me." The guard started moving toward him, but in that brief moment when he stepped away from me, the man stood up, folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness, and walked calmly toward the side exit. By the time my guard alerted the front desk and they tried to follow, he was gone. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I checked out. The manager apologized profusely, offering me free stays, as if I'd ever return, and asking if I wanted to file a police report. I did, but all I could think about was getting out of there. I ran to my rental car, constantly looking over my shoulder, and drove straight home. 2 hours of white-knuckle driving, checking my rearview mirror at every opportunity, convinced he was following me. I thought that would be the end of it. A terrifying experience, but over. 3 days later, I got a call from Detective Rivera with Riverside PD. They'd identified the man as Raymond Cooper, a known stalker with a history of targeting women traveling alone for business. He had multiple restraining orders from women in 3 different states. The truly disturbing part? He deliberately booked the room across from mine, requesting it specifically after seeing me check in. The hotel's internal investigation revealed Cooper had attempted to enter several other female guests' rooms over the past year. The Westbrook had received complaints but had written them off as lost guests or drunk convention goers. They never connected the dots until now. 3 weeks after my stay, Cooper returned to the Westbrook, following the same pattern with another female business traveler. This time, hotel security was watching for him and called police immediately. They arrested him in the hallway outside her room at 2:30 a.m. I had to give a deposition for his trial. Sitting in that room, seeing him in person again, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He stared at me the entire time with that same unsettling half-smile. The prosecutor later told me they found a notebook in Cooper's apartment with details about dozens of women he'd targeted, including their room numbers, schedules, and personal information he'd somehow obtained. My name was in that book, along with notes about my routine from previous stays at the Westbrook. He'd been watching me even before that trip. Cooper was convicted on multiple counts of stalking, attempted breaking and entering, and violation of restraining orders. He's in prison now, but I still check under my bed every night and double-check my locks. I haven't traveled alone since. When work requires it, I make up excuses or send someone else. My boss understands, but I know this fear is limiting my career. I'm in therapy, trying to work through it, but certain things still trigger panic attacks, hotel room doors, the sound of doorknobs turning, even seeing someone standing at a window. The most disturbing part, the thing that keeps me up at night? Detective Rivera told me they believe Cooper had been entering rooms for months, using stolen or duplicated key cards. The chain lock was the only thing that stopped him that night. And in his notebook, next to my name, he'd written just 2 words: next time. I never thought I'd be writing this. My hands are still shaking. I've been staring at this blank page for hours, trying to find the words. It's been 3 days since it happened, and I still can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. I see Jake. It was supposed to be a simple drive through Nevada. I'd been on the road for about 6 hours, making my way from Salt Lake City to San Francisco for a job interview. I'd done the drive before, but never alone. The Nevada desert has this eerie quality to it. Miles and miles of nothing but sand, rock, and scrubby bushes. Beautiful in its own way, but desolate. I was about 2 hours past Elko when I saw him. A lone figure with his thumb out, standing beside a small backpack. It was getting late, maybe 5 p.m., and the sun was starting to sink. I don't know why I stopped. I've never picked up hitchhikers before. My dad always warned me against it. You never know who you're letting into your car, he'd say. God, I wish I'd listened. Something about this guy seemed harmless. Maybe it was the flannel shirt or the friendly wave. Maybe it was because I was bored and wanted some company for the long stretch ahead. Whatever the reason, I pulled over. He jogged up to my window with a big smile. Hey, thanks for stopping. Name's Jake. Jake looked normal enough. Mid-30s, average build, short brown hair. Nothing remarkable or threatening about him. He told me he was headed to Reno, which was on my way. I've been standing out here for 3 hours, he said, as he tossed his backpack in the back seat and climbed in. Started thinking I might have to camp out tonight. The first hour was fine, pleasant even. Jake was chatty and seemed like a decent guy. He told me he was from Oregon, that he'd been traveling around the country doing odd jobs. He had stories about working on fishing boats in Alaska, at ski resorts in Colorado, and on farms in the Midwest. Nothing ties me down, he said. I like being free. We talked about normal stuff, music, movies, the crazy heat. I remember telling him about my interview, how nervous I was about moving to a new city. But then things started to change as the sun went down. The questions became more personal. You got family waiting for you back home? Anyone know you're making this drive today? You ever been out in the desert at night? It's so easy to get lost out there. Each question made me more uncomfortable than the last. I started giving shorter answers, turning the radio up a little. The desert was getting dark, and there were fewer and fewer cars on the highway. Just endless roads stretching ahead and behind us, with nothing but darkness beyond the headlights. I noticed Jake's voice had changed. The friendly tone was gone, replaced by something flat and cold. When I glanced over, he was staring at me with an expression I can't even describe, like he was sizing me up, like I wasn't a person anymore. Pull over, he said suddenly. My stomach dropped. What? I said, pull over. I need to take a leak. I remember thinking maybe that was it. Maybe he just needed a bathroom break. So I pulled onto the shoulder, keeping the engine running. That's when he pulled out the knife. It wasn't huge, maybe a 4-inch blade, but it gleamed in the dim light of the car. I'll never forget the way the dashboard lights reflected off it. Turn the car off, he said quietly. so quietly I almost didn't hear him over the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key turned. My mind was racing. There were no other cars, no lights anywhere. The nearest town was at least 50 miles away. "Give me your wallet, your phone, and the car keys." I handed them over, trying not to look at the knife that was now pointed at my ribs. "Now we're going to take a little walk," he said, smiling now. That smile is burned into my memory. There was nothing human in it. He made me get out and walk around to his side of the car. Then he marched me away from the road, into the desert. The only light came from the half-moon above and the distant glow of my car's taillights. The ground was uneven, all rocks and sandy soil that shifted under my feet. I stumbled a couple of times, and each time Jake would press the knife against my back to keep me moving. We must have walked for 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. My mouth was dry with terror. I kept thinking about my parents, how they'd never know what happened to me, how my body might never be found out here. Finally, Jake stopped me. "You know what happens now, don't you?" he asked. I couldn't speak, couldn't even shake my head. "We're going to play a game," he said, sounding excited. "It's called Make It Back Alive. The rules are simple. You run back to the road. I count to 60, then I come after you. If you make it to the road before I catch you, you win. If I catch you," he traced the knife along my cheek. "Well, let's just say you don't want me to catch you." My legs were like jelly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Please," I managed to say, "please don't do this. You can take my car, take everything, just let me go." He laughed. It was a horrible sound in the quiet desert night. "Start running," he whispered in my ear. 1, 2, 3. I ran. God, I ran like I've never run before. The desert floor was treacherous in the dark. I couldn't see where I was going. I kept tripping over rocks, scraping my hands and knees. Once I fell into a cactus, the spines digging into my arm like tiny knives. But the pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting away from Jake. I could hear him behind me. He wasn't counting anymore. He was laughing, calling out to me, "I'm coming for you. Better run faster." I couldn't tell where the road was. Everything looked the same in the dark, just shadows and more shadows. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming with exhaustion. But I kept going, stumbling forward, changing direction whenever I thought I heard him getting closer. Then I saw it, the faint red glow of my car's taillights. The road had to be there. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the stabbing pain in my side. I was maybe 50 yards from the road when I heard him right behind me. "Got you," he hissed. I felt something tear at the back of my shirt and a burning pain across my shoulder blade. The knife. He'd slashed me. I screamed and somehow found another burst of speed. I don't know how. Pure terror, I guess. I could see the road clearly now. My car sitting there, a beacon of safety. Just a few more yards. I heard Jake's footsteps pounding behind me, felt his breath on my neck. Then my foot hit the asphalt of the shoulder, and I went down hard, skinning my palms and chin on the rough surface. I rolled onto my back, certain this was it. Jake was standing over me, knife raised, face twisted in fury. I closed my eyes, waiting for the pain. But then came the sound of a vehicle. Headlights swept across us, illuminating Jake's face. For a split second, he looked uncertain. Then he lunged at me anyway, knife aimed at my chest. I rolled to the side, the blade scraping along the pavement where I'd just been. The approaching vehicle, a semi-truck, blared its horn and squealed to a stop. I heard a door slam, then heavy footsteps. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" a deep voice bellowed. I looked up to see a mountain of a man coming toward us. He was holding something long and dark. A shotgun. Jake hesitated, knife still in hand, looking from me to the truck driver and back. "Drop it now, or I swear to God I'll blow your goddamn head off," the truck driver said. He pumped the shotgun for emphasis. Jake threw the knife down and backed away. "This isn't what it looks like," he started to say, hands up in a placating gesture. "Shut the hell up," the trucker growled. He looked at me. "You okay?" I managed to nod, though I was far from okay. Jake took that moment of distraction to turn and sprint back into the desert darkness. The trucker raised his shotgun, but then lowered it without firing. "Let him go," he said. "Desert's got its own way of dealing with people." He helped me up and into his truck. I was shaking uncontrollably, blood soaking the back of my shirt. The cut wasn't deep, thankfully, but it stung like fire. "Name's Bill," the trucker said as he handed me a bottle of water and a clean towel to press against my wound. "Let's get you to Austin. There's a clinic there and we can call the police." The drive to Austin was a blur. Bill kept talking to me, probably to keep me from going into shock. He told me he'd been driving this route for 20 years, that he'd seen some strange things in the desert, but never anything like this. "You're lucky I came along when I did," he said. "This stretch of highway, it can get mighty lonely." At the clinic in Austin, a nurse cleaned and bandaged my wound, while a local sheriff's deputy took my statement. They found my car where I'd left it, keys still in the ignition. My phone and wallet were gone. "We'll put out an APB for this Jake character," the deputy told me. "But honestly, if he's smart, he's long gone by now. Probably hitched another ride. That was 3 days ago. I'm in a motel in Reno now. I missed my interview. I can't bring myself to get back on the road yet. Every time I think about driving that lonely stretch of highway, I feel like I'm going to throw up. The worst part is the not knowing. Is Jake still out there? Is he doing this to someone else right now?" The deputy told me they've had reports of similar incidents along I-80 over the past 2 years. Different descriptions of the guy, but the same MO. He picks isolated stretches of highway, preys on lone drivers. I keep replaying it all in my mind. His voice changing, the knife appearing out of nowhere, the way he laughed while chasing me. What kind of person gets pleasure from that kind of terror? I haven't told my parents yet. I don't know how to. They'll want me to come home, and maybe I should. But first, I need to find a way to sleep without seeing his face, without feeling the phantom touch of that blade against my skin. I know I should feel lucky to be alive, and I am. But I also feel changed, like something fundamental has been taken from me. Not just my wallet or phone, but my sense of trust, my belief that most people are basically good. So if you're reading this, please, don't pick up hitchhikers, no matter how harmless they seem. And if you're driving through Nevada and see a guy calling himself Jake with short brown hair and a friendly smile, keep driving. Don't even slow down. Because the thing I remember most clearly, the thing that wakes me up in a cold sweat, is what he whispered while marching me into the desert at knife point. "I love it when they run. It makes the game so much more fun." I've been wanting to get this off my chest for months now. Even typing this brings back that feeling in my stomach. But I need to share what happened to me last March on Highway 98. I still drive that road almost daily, but never at night anymore. Never again. It was a Friday night, around 1:30 a.m. I'd been at my friend Megan's place in Panama City for her 30th birthday. Nothing crazy, just drinks, silly board games, and catching up with people I hadn't seen in forever. I'd planned to crash on her couch, but my dog Bailey was home alone, and I felt guilty about leaving him longer than promised. So I decided to make the hour drive back to my place near Destin. Looking back, I wish I'd just stayed. The drive started normal enough. The roads were practically empty, just me, some occasional semis, and the pitch-black Florida night. I remember feeling a little tired, but definitely alert enough to drive. I had the windows cracked, sipping the coffee I'd grabbed on my way out, and was listening to this true crime podcast I'd been into. Ironic, right? I'd been on the highway maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed the headlights. Nothing unusual, just another car behind me, keeping a normal distance. I didn't think anything of it until I made my first turn onto a smaller state road that connects to 98. The car followed. Again, no big deal. Plenty of people use that route. But then I noticed something weird. This car was matching my speed exactly. When I'd speed up slightly, they'd speed up. When I slowed down a bit, they slowed too. I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but that uneasy feeling started creeping in. After another 10 minutes, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. The car had followed me through every lane change, every slight variation in speed. It wasn't tailgating me yet, just there, consistently, maintaining the exact same distance. Close enough that I could see it was a dark sedan, but far enough that I couldn't make out much else in my mirrors. I decided to test my growing paranoia. There was this random right turn coming up that nobody takes unless they live in that little beach community. I slowed down, hit my blinker at the last second, and made the turn. The car followed. My heart rate jumped. Maybe they lived there too, but the timing felt deliberate. I navigated through the neighborhood's winding streets, taking random turns, hoping I was wrong. When I turned back onto the main road a few minutes later, I held my breath, watching my rearview mirror. The same car emerged from the neighborhood right behind me. That's when the real fear set in. This wasn't coincidence anymore. I was being followed, intentionally, on a nearly empty highway in the middle of the night. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to stay calm and think. My phone was at 18% battery. I considered calling 911 but hesitated. What would I say? A car is following me but hasn't done anything threatening yet. I decided to keep driving toward more populated areas, where I'd feel safer making that call if needed. That's when things escalated. The car suddenly closed the gap between us, their high beams flashing repeatedly. The glare filled my car, temporarily blinding me as I squinted and adjusted my rearview mirror. My knuckles went white on the wheel as I pressed the gas harder. I was doing 80 mph now, definitely over the limit, but the car matched me effortlessly. They were so close I couldn't even see their headlights anymore in my rear view. Just the grille of what I could now tell was a dark blue or black sedan. I remembered there was a 24-hour gas station coming up in about 2 miles. People, cameras, safety. I put on my turn signal, planning to pull in there and call for help. That's when they did something that still makes my blood run cold. They pulled into the left lane beside me, pacing me perfectly. I couldn't see the driver clearly, just a shadowy figure behind the wheel. I kept my eyes forward, terrified to look over, but I could feel them staring at me. I approached my turn for the gas station, slowing down, ready to make a sharp right, but they swerved suddenly in front of me, cutting me off and forcing me to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting them. I missed the turn completely. "What the fuck?" I screamed in my empty car, panic really setting in now. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the wheel. I was full-on hyperventilating. The gas station, my safe haven, was now in my rearview mirror, growing smaller by the second. The car had moved back behind me, high beams blasting again. I was trapped on this dark stretch of highway with at least 15 miles until the next town. My mind raced through options. I couldn't outrun them. My Honda Civic wasn't exactly built for speed. I thought about stopping on the shoulder, but the idea of being a sitting target terrified me even more. I needed to do something unexpected. In desperation, I remembered a trick my dad once told me about evading tailgaters. I watched for a straight stretch of road, and when I found one, I tapped my brakes hard, not enough to cause an accident, but enough to surprise the driver behind me. It worked, briefly. They swerved slightly and fell back a few car lengths. I used that moment to gun it, pushing my car as fast as it would go. For about 30 seconds, I thought I'd gained some distance. Then I saw those same headlights growing larger in my mirror again. But now they were flashing their lights in an erratic pattern, on, off, while swerving slightly between lanes. I was sobbing now, fumbling for my phone, ready to call 911 regardless of my battery. That's when they pulled alongside me again. This time, I couldn't help but look over. What I saw haunts me still. The driver, a man with what looked like a baseball cap pulled low, was gesturing frantically at me. Not threatening gestures like I'd feared, but wild, urgent motions. He was pointing forward, then down, then making a pulling motion with his hand. I couldn't understand what he wanted. Was this some kind of trick to get me to pull over? I shook my head violently and focused forward again, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. That's when I saw the sign for Joe's all-night diner coming up on the right. I'd passed it 100 times, but never stopped there. Tonight, it looked like salvation. There were a few cars in the parking lot and lights blazing inside. Without signaling, I yanked the wheel right and screeched into the gravel parking lot, throwing up dust and rocks. I didn't even park properly, just slammed to a stop at an angle near the entrance, grabbed my phone and keys and ran inside like my life depended on it. The bell above the door jangled as I burst in, startling the few patrons inside, a couple of truckers at the counter and an elderly couple in a booth. The waitress turned to greet me, but her smile dropped when she saw my face. "Someone's following me," I gasped out, still struggling to breathe normally. "They've been chasing me for miles." A large man in a cook's apron came out from behind the counter. "Where are they now?" he asked, moving toward the windows. "Right behind me in a dark sedan," I said, not wanting to look outside. "Please, can someone call the police?" The cook peered out the blinds, then nodded grimly. "They're still out there, parked at the edge of the lot, lights still on." He pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911 without hesitation. I collapsed into the nearest booth, shaking uncontrollably. The waitress brought me a glass of water and sat with me while the cook spoke with the dispatcher. I could hear him describing the situation, the car, giving them the diner's location. "They're sending someone right now, honey," the waitress told me, her hand on my arm. "Highway patrol's not far from here." I nodded, unable to speak, tears still streaming down my face. I couldn't bring myself to look out the window, terrified of seeing that car, that person still watching me. The elderly woman from the other booth came over and sat beside me. "You're safe now," she said softly. "My husband was a deputy for 30 years. Nobody's going to try anything with all of us here." For the next 12 minutes, the longest 12 minutes of my life, we waited. The cook kept watch at the window, updating me. "They're still there. Engine running. Hasn't moved." Then we heard it, the blessed sound of sirens approaching. The cook's face changed. "They're pulling out," he said, driving away fast. The relief nearly made me pass out. Within moments, a police cruiser pulled into the lot. lights flashing. Another followed shortly after. An officer came inside while the other presumably went after the sedan. I gave my statement, describing everything that had happened, the following, the high beams, the cut-off at the gas station, the wild gesturing. The officer was kind but serious, taking detailed notes. He asked if I'd gotten a license plate. I hadn't. A clear description of the driver, just the vague impression of a man in a cap, or the exact make and model of the car, some kind of darker sedan, maybe a Toyota or Honda. It wasn't much to go on. He radioed his partner, who reported no sign of the vehicle on the highway in either direction. They'd vanished. The officer offered to escort me home, which I gratefully accepted. Before leaving, the diner staff and the few customers all made sure I was okay. The cook even packed me a coffee and slice of pie for the nerves. Small kindnesses that meant the world in that moment. The drive home behind the police cruiser was the only time I've felt safe on that highway since. The officer waited until I was inside my apartment and had checked all the rooms before he left. I hugged Bailey tighter than I ever had, then double-checked every lock, window, and door before collapsing into bed, still fully clothed and trembling. Here's the part that still keeps me up at night. The next morning I went out to move my car from the haphazard way I'd left it. That's when I noticed it. My rear driver's side tire was almost completely flat, with a large screw embedded in it. A cold wave washed over me as I stared at that tire. Had it been going flat while I was driving? Is that what the man was trying to tell me with those gestures, pointing down, making that pulling motion? I'll never know for sure. The police report went nowhere. They said without better identification of the vehicle or driver, there wasn't much they could do. Was I being followed by someone with bad intentions who chased me for miles? Or was it someone trying to alert me to a dangerous flat tire in the making? Their aggressive driving just an attempt to get my attention. Either way, I can't shake the fear. I've installed additional security at my apartment. I've changed my routes, my schedules. I never drive that highway after dark anymore. And I check my rearview mirror constantly, watching for headlights that follow too consistently, too intentionally. Every night when I close my eyes, I still see those flashing high beams, still feel the terror of being trapped on that dark highway. And I wonder if they're still out there, whoever they are, following someone else through the darkness of Florida's endless roads. I still can't believe it's been 2 weeks since it happened. My hands still shake when I think about it. I keep replaying every moment in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, or what might have happened if, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We were on our summer road trip, me, my wife Sarah, and our 2 kids, Emma, 8, and Tyler, 6. We'd been planning this Texas trip for months. Sarah's parents live in Houston, and we were driving down from Oklahoma City to spend a week with them. Nothing fancy, just your typical family vacation. We'd done the drive before, so I wasn't worried about anything. We left early that morning around 6 a.m., wanting to beat the worst of the summer heat. The kids were excited at first, but by midday, they were getting restless in the back seat. You know how it is with kids on long drives. The novelty wears off quick, and then it's just endless rounds of, "Are we there yet?" and complaints about seatbelts being too tight. Sarah suggested we take a break, find a place where the kids could run around for a bit. We'd been driving for about 4 hours straight, and I needed to stretch my legs too. Plus, our cooler of snacks was running low, and I figured we could all use a bathroom break. I remember checking the GPS and seeing we were still a good 3 hours from Houston. That stretch of highway through northern Texas isn't exactly packed with options, but I spotted a rest area coming up in about 10 miles and decided that would work fine. Looking back, I wish I'd just pushed through another hour to a proper town with a McDonald's or something. Anywhere with other families, security cameras, witnesses. But hindsight's always 20/20, right? The rest area looked normal enough when we pulled in. Basic concrete building with restrooms, a few picnic tables scattered under trees for shade, some vending machines. There were only two other vehicles there, an old pickup truck and what looked like a work van, both parked at the far end of the lot. I remember thinking it was odd they were parked right next to each other when the lot was empty, but I didn't give it much thought at the time. I pulled into a spot near the restrooms, and we all piled out of the car. The heat hit us immediately, that thick, suffocating Texas summer heat that makes the air feel like soup. The kids were just happy to be out of their seatbelts. Emma ran straight to a patch of grass and started doing cartwheels while Tyler chased after her. Sarah grabbed her purse and headed for the restroom. "Watch the kids," she called over her shoulder. "I'll just be a minute." I remember leaning against our SUV, checking my phone for messages, glancing up occasionally to make sure the kids weren't wandering too far. That's when I first noticed them. 5 men had emerged from around the side of the rest area building. They weren't together at first, a couple by the vending machines, the others smoking near the pickup truck, but something about them caught my attention. They kept looking over at us, then at each other. They weren't dressed alike or anything, just regular clothes, jeans, t-shirts, work boots, but there was something coordinated about them. One guy, taller than the others with a red bandana around his neck, nodded toward my kids. Another one, heavy-set with a shaved head, spat on the ground and started walking in our direction. Not directly at us, but angling that way. My dad instincts started firing up. I pushed off from the car and called to the kids, "Emma, Tyler, come over here, please." The kids, oblivious to anything wrong, groaned in protest. "But Dad, we just got out," Emma whined. "Just come over here for a second," I said, trying to keep my voice casual while watching the men from the corner of my eye. The men had stopped their movement, but they were all watching us now, not even pretending otherwise. Sarah came out of the restroom just then, and I felt a momentary relief. "Hey," I said quietly as she approached, "I think we should get going." She looked confused. "Already? I thought we were going to have some snacks and let the kids—" I cut her off, nodding slightly toward the men. "I don't like the look of those guys. They keep watching us." Sarah glanced over, then quickly looked away. "Oh," she whispered, her expression changing as she registered the situation. "Yeah, let's go." We turned to the kids, who had thankfully moved closer. "Time to go, guys," Sarah said with forced cheerfulness. "We'll stop somewhere else for lunch in a bit." "But I have to go to the bathroom," Tyler complained. I hesitated. The men were still watching, but they hadn't moved any closer. "Okay, buddy. I'll take you real quick. Emma, go with Mom to the car." I took Tyler's hand and walked him to the men's room, my heart pounding the whole time. The restroom was empty, thank God. I rushed Tyler through his bathroom break, standing right outside the stall, jumping at every sound. When we came back out, my blood ran cold. The men had moved. They were now standing between us and our car, where Sarah was buckling Emma into her seat. They weren't blocking the way exactly, just positioned so we'd have to walk past them. The guy with the red bandana was leaning against a trash can, watching Sarah with an intensity that made my skin crawl. 2 others were pretending to look at a map on the information board. The heavy-set one and another skinny guy with tattoos covering his arms were standing closer to our car, smoking and talking in low voices. I tightened my grip on Tyler's hand and steered him toward the car, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. I'm not a small guy, 6'1", and I stay in decent shape. But these men looked hard, the kind who've been in fights and know how to handle themselves. And there were 5 of them. As we got closer, the 2 men near our car shifted slightly, widening their stance. It was subtle but unmistakable. They were preparing to intercept us. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. Tyler pressed against my leg, suddenly sensing the tension. The heavy-set guy smiled, showing yellow teeth. "Nice family you got," he said, his eyes flicking to my son, then over to where Sarah was now standing protectively by Emma's door. "Thanks," I said shortly. "We need to get going." "Where you headed?" asked the tattooed guy, stepping slightly into our path. "Long way from anywhere out here." "Houston," I answered automatically, then immediately regretted giving away any information. "Houston," he repeated, nodding like this was fascinating news. "Got family there?" By now the other 3 men had drifted over, forming a loose semicircle around us. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Tyler was squeezing my hand painfully tight. "Look," I said, trying to sound reasonable but firm. "We're just passing through. We need to get back on the road." The guy with the red bandana stepped closer. "No need to rush off. It's hot out. Kids look like they could use a break." His eyes never left Sarah as he spoke, and I saw her shift uncomfortably, moving to stand behind the car door like a shield. "We're fine," I insisted, trying to edge around them toward the car. The heavy-set guy moved to block me. "Hey now, we're just being friendly. Right, boys?" The others murmured agreement, closing in slightly. I felt Tyler trembling against me. The situation was escalating, and I was rapidly running out of options. I considered making a dash for the car, but I'd have to get Tyler in his seat, and Sarah would need to get in too, and there was no way I could outrun all 5 men if they decided to stop us. Then things went from bad to worse. The guy with the bandana suddenly moved toward Sarah. "Here, let me help you with that," he said, reaching for her arm as if to assist her into the car. Sarah jerked back. "Don't touch me!" But he grabbed her wrist anyway, his fingers digging in hard enough that I could see the skin whiten around his grip. She screamed, not a Hollywood scream, but a startled yelp of pain and fear that cut through me like a knife. Emma started crying from inside the car. Tyler burst into tears beside me. "Let her go," I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "Now." The man smiled, still holding Sarah's wrist. "Or what, tough guy? You gonna take on all of us?" The others laughed, spreading out slightly to surround us more completely. I've never felt so helpless in my life. My wife was being held by some stranger, my kids were crying, and I was outnumbered 5 to 1. I scanned the empty rest area desperately, praying for another car to pull in, for a highway patrol officer to appear, for anything. The heavy-set guy stepped closer to me. "Here's what's gonna happen," he said quietly. "You're gonna give us your wallet, your phone, and your car keys. Then maybe we let you and the boy walk away. The girls might need to stick around a bit longer, have a little fun with us." Ice flooded my veins. This wasn't just a robbery. These men had something much worse in mind. I started calculating desperate options. Could I get Tyler to run for the trees while I tried to create a distraction? Could Sarah break free and get to the car with Emma? Even as I thought it, I knew it was hopeless. We were trapped. Just as I was about to make a desperate lunge for the man holding Sarah, I heard the rumble of an engine. Headlights swept across the parking lot as a dusty brown pickup truck pulled in, driving fast enough that gravel sprayed from under its tires. The men's attention wavered for a split second, just enough for Sarah to wrench her arm free and back up against our car, clutching her wrist. The truck parked abruptly, and an older man stepped out. He was tall, maybe in his 60s, with weathered skin and steel-gray hair. He wore jeans, boots, and a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Nothing intimidating about his appearance, but something in the way he carried himself made the hair on my arms stand up. He slammed his truck door and looked straight at us, taking in the scene with a quick glance. "Everything all right over here?" he called, his voice carrying easily across the lot. The men shifted nervously. The one with the red bandana muttered something to the others. "We're fine," the heavy-set guy called back, his tone suddenly less confident. "Just having a conversation." The older man walked toward us, unhurried but purposeful. "Is that right?" he asked, looking directly at me. "These men were just leaving," I said, finding my voice. "We need to get back on the road." The older man nodded, stopping a few feet away from our group. "Well then, don't let me interrupt." He didn't move, just stood there, watching the 5 men with an unnerving steadiness. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication I couldn't decipher. The tattooed guy cleared his throat. "Yeah, we were just heading out anyway." He nudged the guy next to him, and they started backing away. "Misunderstanding," the bandana guy muttered, no longer looking at Sarah. "No harm done." The older man stayed where he was, watching as all 5 men drifted back toward their vehicles, talking in low voices and casting occasional glances back at us. I hustled Tyler to the car, opening the door for him to scramble into his seat. Sarah was already helping Emma, whose face was streaked with tears. Once the kids were secure, I turned to the older man, who had moved closer to our car. "Thank you," I said, my voice still shaky. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." He studied me for a moment, his eyes so pale blue they were almost colorless. "You need to get your family out of here," he said quietly. "Those men aren't done. They're just regrouping." A chill ran through me as I glanced over at the men, who were indeed huddled by their pickup truck, looking our way and talking animatedly. "Get in your car and drive," the older man continued. "Don't stop until you reach civilization. Skip the next rest area too. They might try to catch up with you there." "Who are they?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The older man shook his head. "Bad news. That's all you need to know. Now go." We didn't need to be told twice. We thanked him again and piled into our SUV. As I started the engine, I saw the older man walking back to his truck, keeping himself positioned between us and the group of men. We peeled out of that rest area fast. In the rearview mirror, I saw the men watching us leave, and the older man standing by his truck, still watching them. As we merged back onto the highway, I saw the men's pickup pull out after us. "They're following us," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear as she checked the side mirror. I pressed harder on the gas, pushing our SUV well over the speed limit. The pickup stayed behind us, keeping pace. For 15 terrifying minutes, they stayed on our tail. The kids, sensing our fear, had gone completely silent in the back seat. Sarah kept looking back, updating me on their distance. "They're getting closer," she said at one point, her knuckles white as she gripped the dashboard. Then, suddenly, the older man's brown truck appeared behind them. I have no idea where he came from or how he caught up so quickly. The minute the men spotted him, they took the next exit and disappeared. The brown truck followed us for another 20 miles, keeping a respectful distance, before it too turned off. I'll never know who that man was or why he helped us, but I'm convinced he saved us from something terrible. We drove non-stop for the next 2 hours, only pulling over when we reached a busy truck stop with dozens of people around. Sarah was shaking so badly she could barely speak. The kids were subdued, picking up on our fear, even though we tried to act normal. We ended up getting a motel room in a well-lit area with security cameras and a busy parking lot. None of us had the nerve to get back on the road that day. I called Sarah's parents to let them know we'd be a day late, making up some excuse about car trouble. That night in the motel, after the kids had finally fallen asleep, Sarah broke down. The bruises were forming on her wrist where that man had grabbed her. "What did they want from us?" she whispered. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what the heavy-set man had said about having fun with her and Emma. I just held her while she cried. We made it to Houston the next day without incident, but the trip was ruined. We were jumpy, constantly checking our mirrors for that pickup truck. The kids had nightmares. Even now, back home, I can't shake the memory of those men's eyes. Cold, predatory, seeing us not as people but as prey. I've been trying to make sense of what happened. Was it random or were we targeted somehow? Did they watch for families at these isolated rest stops? What would have happened if that older man hadn't shown up? These questions keep me up at night. I've looked at news reports from that area, wondering if other families have encountered the same men. I haven't found anything specific, but there are enough missing persons cases and unsolved crimes along that stretch of highway to make my blood run cold. We won't be taking that route again. We won't be stopping at isolated rest areas anywhere. And I'll always be grateful to that mysterious older man who seemed to appear out of nowhere exactly when we needed him. I still don't know what those men wanted from us that day, but when I remember the look in their eyes, I'm certain of one thing. They meant us harm, real harm, and we barely escaped. I still wake up in cold sweats some nights thinking about it. Even though it happened 3 months ago, I've struggled to talk about it with anyone except my therapist and the police. I figured writing it down might help me process it and maybe serve as a warning to others. I've always been the type to help people when they're in trouble, and I guess I expected the same in return. I couldn't have been more wrong. I was driving back from a sales conference in Kansas City, heading toward Lincoln, where I live. It was late, probably around 11:30 p.m., and I was exhausted but determined to make it home rather than spend money on another hotel night. The highway was practically empty. I'd pass another car maybe every 10 minutes or so. It was that kind of deep country darkness where your headlights only illuminate a small patch of road ahead, and everything else is just black. I remember I was listening to a podcast to stay awake when I felt that unmistakable thump, thump, thump of a flat tire. My heart sank. I'm not completely useless with cars, but changing a tire on a dark highway wasn't exactly how I wanted to spend my night. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put on my hazards, and sat there for a minute, just collecting myself and checking my phone. No surprise. Barely any signal out there. I popped the trunk, grabbed the spare and jack, and got to work. It was colder than I expected, and the wind whipping across the plains made it feel even worse. My fingers were getting numb as I struggled with the lug nuts. I'd been at it maybe 10 minutes when headlights appeared in the distance behind me. Part of me felt relieved. Maybe it was highway patrol. But another part felt exposed and vulnerable. I was alone on a deserted stretch of highway, and whoever was coming had no reason to stop. But they did stop. A dark blue pickup slowed down and pulled in about 20 feet behind my car. I stood up, still holding the tire iron, not sure what to expect. A man got out, average height, wearing a red baseball cap and a work jacket. He looked like any regular Midwestern guy in his 40s. "Looks like you got some trouble there," he called out, walking toward me. His voice was friendly, with that flat Midwestern accent. Nothing threatening about him. "Yeah, flat tire," I answered, still keeping the tire iron visible in my hand. "I've got it under control, though." "Nah, let me help you out. It's freezing out here, and 4 hands are better than 2. I'm Mike, by the way." He didn't offer to shake hands, just nodded and squatted down to look at my progress. I hesitated, but then decided it would be rude to refuse. He seemed normal enough, and I really did want to get back on the road as quickly as possible. "Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm Taylor." Mike knew what he was doing. That was clear right away. He took over jacking up the car and loosening the remaining lug nuts while I held the flashlight from my phone. We didn't talk much, just the occasional instruction from him about holding the light somewhere specific or handing him the spare. "You heading toward Lincoln?" he asked as he worked. "Yeah, coming back from a work thing in KC. "Long drive this time of night," he commented, tightening the last lug nut. "There we go, all set." The whole thing took maybe 15 minutes with his help. I was genuinely grateful as I put the flat tire and tools back in my trunk. "Thanks so much for stopping. Most people wouldn't have." He shrugged. "No problem. Actually, I'm heading to Seward myself. My truck's been making some weird noises, and I don't want to push it too far tonight. Any chance I could get a ride to the next town? There's a motel there where I can stay until morning." I froze for a second. Everything in my gut told me not to let a stranger into my car, but he'd just helped me, and I felt obligated. Plus, Seward wasn't far off my route, maybe 20 minutes. Refusing seemed ungrateful after he'd stopped to help me. Sure," I found myself saying. "Let me just get my car back in order." "Great, I'll grab my bag from the truck." As I watched him walk back to his pickup, I had a moment of doubt. Why would he abandon his truck on the highway? But before I could think too hard about it, he was walking back with a small duffel bag, and I was unlocking my passenger door. The first 10 minutes were fine. We made small talk about the weather, gas prices, normal stuff. He seemed relaxed, mentioned he worked construction and was heading to a job site. Nothing raised any immediate red flags, but I still felt uneasy. I kept glancing at him out of the corner of my eye, noticing how he was watching the road, studying the exits. We passed a sign for Route 34, and he suddenly pointed at it. "Hey, take that exit. It's quicker to Seward." I frowned. "I thought we'd stay on the highway and take the main exit. That's what my GPS recommends." "Nah, trust me. I drive these roads all the time. This way'll save you 15 minutes easy." Against my better judgment, I took the exit. The road immediately became narrower, darker, with no streetlights and fewer reflectors. We drove for about 5 minutes when he pointed again. "Turn right up here on County Road 8. This road was even smaller, barely 2 lanes with no markings, surrounded by empty fields. My anxiety was growing by the second. "Are you sure this is right? This doesn't look like it goes to Seward." That's when everything changed. His friendly demeanor vanished in an instant. He grabbed my steering wheel with his left hand and reached toward his waistband with his right. "Pull over. Now." His voice was ice cold. I panicked and tried to keep control of the car, but he yanked the wheel hard to the right. We veered off the road onto a dirt track leading into a field. I slammed on the brakes and the car skidded to a stop. "What are you doing?" I shouted, trying to push his hand away from the wheel. His face was completely different now, eyes wide, jaw clenched. "You're not going anywhere," he said, and I saw something metallic in his right hand. In that moment, I realized how completely isolated we were. No houses in sight, no passing cars, no one who could hear me if I screamed. My phone was in the cup holder between us, while he was focused on pulling whatever it was from his pocket. I lunged for my phone and hit the emergency button on the side 3 times, something I remembered reading about that would silently call 911 and send my location. He saw what I was doing and slapped the phone out of my hand. It went flying somewhere in the dark footwell. "Bad move," he growled, and grabbed my throat with his left hand, while his right hand came up with what I now saw was a hunting knife. I don't remember consciously deciding what to do next. Pure survival instinct took over. I brought my knee up hard into his forearm, breaking his grip on my throat, then kicked out with both feet, catching him in the chest. The confined space of the car actually helped me. He couldn't dodge easily, and my feet connected solidly. He grunted and fell back against the passenger door. I used that moment to unlock my door and tumble out onto the dirt. I could hear him cursing and fumbling with his door as I scrambled to my feet and ran. I had no idea where I was going, just away from the car, away from him. The moon was only half full, providing just enough light to see the outlines of the landscape. I ran across the open field, heading toward what looked like a tree line, my lungs burning in the cold air. Behind me, I heard his door slam and his footsteps pounding the dirt. "You're dead!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the empty fields. "There's nowhere to run out here." He was right. There was nowhere to hide in the open field, and he was gaining on me. I pushed harder, my dress shoes slipping on the frozen ground, my work clothes completely inappropriate for running for my life. I reached the tree line and plunged in, branches slapping my face. It wasn't a forest, just a windbreak between fields, but it was something. I changed direction, running parallel to the road now, hoping to throw him off. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound, distant sirens. My emergency call had gone through, but they sounded far away, and I had no idea if they could find me without my phone. The sirens seemed to enrage him. "You called them? You're dead before they get here." His voice was closer than I expected. I burst out of the trees and saw something that made my heart leap. Lights. Not just any lights, but the unmistakable warm yellow glow of windows in a farmhouse about a quarter mile across another field. I changed course immediately and sprinted toward it. My lungs were on fire, my legs threatening to give out, but the sight of that farmhouse kept me going. The sirens were getting louder, but so were his footsteps behind me. I didn't dare look back. I reached the gravel driveway and ran up to the house, pounding on the front door with all my strength. "Help! Please! Someone's trying to kill me!" The porch light came on, and I heard movement inside. I looked back for the first time and saw Mike about 100 yards behind me, knife in hand, hesitating now that I'd reached a house. The door opened a few inches, secured by a chain. An elderly man peered out suspiciously. "What in God's name? Please," I gasped, barely able to speak between breaths. "He's going to kill me. Please let me in. The police are coming." The man looked past me, saw my pursuer, and his eyes widened. He closed the door for a heart-stopping second, then reopened it fully, ushering me inside and locking it behind me. "Martha, call 911, he shouted to someone in another room, "and get my shotgun from the closet." I collapsed against the wall, legs finally giving out. Through the window, I saw Mike turn and run back toward the road. The sirens were very close now. An elderly woman appeared from a hallway, holding a shotgun awkwardly. She handed it to the man, then came to me with a glass of water. "Are you hurt, dear? What happened?" I could barely get the words out between gasps. "Flat tire." He stopped to help, asked for a ride, pulled a knife. I drank the water gratefully. The man stood by the window, shotgun ready, watching. "I see headlights on the road." might be the police. It was. Two county sheriff's cars pulled up minutes later, followed shortly by a state trooper. I was still shaking uncontrollably when they came in. I gave them a description of Mike and my car, along with the approximate location where I'd left it. They found him hiding in a ditch not far from my car, still with the knife. They also found zip ties, duct tape, and a tarp in his duffel bag. His truck, when they located it further back on the highway, had stolen plates. I learned later that Mike was actually Raymond Keller, wanted in connection with two disappearances in Oklahoma and Missouri. Both victims had been driving alone on rural highways at night. They haven't been found. I was lucky. If my phone hadn't connected that emergency call, if that farmhouse hadn't been there, if the elderly couple hadn't let me in, I don't want to think about what would have happened. The police told me afterward that County Road 8 leads to an abandoned quarry. There's nothing out there for miles except empty fields and deep water-filled pits. Nobody would have found me. I haven't driven alone at night since then. I'll pay for the hotel room now, thank you very much. And I've stopped helping strangers on the road. I call highway patrol instead. I know that makes me sound callous, but when I think about how easily I could have become another missing person statistic just because I wanted to return a favor. Every time I see a blue pickup truck, my heart still races. Every time I hear footsteps behind me, I have to fight the urge to run, and I'll never, ever take a shortcut again. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since it happened, but every time I close my eyes, I see Jake's face changing from friendly to threatening as he pulled that gun out. I keep hearing Lisa's nervous laughter. My hands still shake when I think about it. I've been driving RVs for years. My 2018 Winnebago Mini Winnie isn't exactly luxury, but it's my second home. I'd spent 2 weeks exploring the Grand Canyon and was heading back through northern Arizona toward Flagstaff. The weather was perfect that day, clear blue skies, about 75 degrees. The kind of day where nothing bad should happen. I was about an hour outside of Williams on Route 64, playing my usual road trip playlist and thinking about where I'd stay that night. The road was pretty empty, just occasional cars passing by. That's when I spotted them standing beside an old blue Honda Civic with the hood up, waving frantically at passing vehicles. A young couple, probably mid-20s. The guy, Jake, as I'd later learn, was wearing a faded green t-shirt and jeans. The girl, Lisa, had her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and was wearing denim shorts and a white tank top. They looked like any other road-tripping couple you'd see in Arizona. Normal, harmless. I've always been the type to stop and help. My dad taught me that, said it was what decent people do. I'd stopped for stranded travelers maybe a dozen times over the years, never had a problem. I pulled over about 50 feet ahead of their car. Through my side mirror, I saw them grab backpacks from their car and jog toward my RV. I stepped out into the heat. "Hey, thanks so much for stopping," the guy said, extending his hand. "I'm Jake. This is my girlfriend Lisa. Our car just died on us." "Radiator's been giving us trouble all day," Lisa added. She had this nervous energy about her, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I figured she was just anxious about being stranded. "I tried to look at it, but I'm useless with cars," Jake said with a self-deprecating laugh. "We've been stuck here for almost 2 hours. No one would stop." I glanced at their car. Nothing obviously wrong that I could see from a distance. "Did you call for a tow?" "No cell service out here," Lisa said quickly. "We tried, believe me." I checked my phone. 3 bars. That should have been my first warning sign, but I dismissed it. Cell coverage can be spotty. and maybe their carrier had worse coverage than mine. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Flagstaff," Jake said. "We've got friends there who can help us out. It's only about 60 miles, right?" "Yeah, about that," I confirmed. "I can give you a lift into Williams at least. There's a mechanic there who could help with your car." "That would be amazing," Lisa said, her relief seeming genuine. "We really appreciate it." As they climbed into my RV, I noticed Jake scanning the interior carefully. I gave them a quick tour. Bathroom in the back, kitchenette on the side, my living space. I told them to make themselves comfortable at the small dining table while I got back on the road. We made small talk as I drove. They said they were from California, taking a road trip through the Southwest. Jake claimed he worked in IT. Lisa said she was between jobs. They asked about my RV, how long I'd been traveling. Normal conversation. About half an hour later, we were approaching a junction. I was explaining that we'd be in Williams in another 15 minutes when everything changed. I heard a clicking sound behind me and Lisa saying, "I'm sorry about this." When I glanced in the rearview mirror, Jake was standing behind my seat, holding a gun pointed at the back of my head. My stomach dropped. That cold, hollow feeling when your brain can't process what's happening. I've never had a gun pointed at me before. It doesn't feel real at first. "Keep driving," Jake said, his voice completely different now, harder, flatter. "Don't do anything stupid." "What's going on?" My voice came out higher than normal. My hands were suddenly sweaty on the steering wheel. "We need your RV," Lisa explained, now standing next to him. "Our car wasn't broken down. We just needed a different vehicle." "Why? Just shut up and drive," Jake cut me off. "Take the next right. We're not going to Williams." My mind was racing. Were they going to kill me, steal my RV, leave me stranded in the desert? I considered jerking the wheel, maybe crashing, but at 65 mph that would likely kill all of us. I took the right turn as instructed. It led onto a smaller state highway, much less trafficked. "Listen," Lisa said, her tone almost apologetic. "We're not going to hurt you if you cooperate. We just need to get somewhere safe. We had some trouble in Vegas," Jake added. "The kind that gets the police involved. We need to disappear for a while." That's when it clicked. "You robbed someone?" Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Something like that. A casino wasn't as careful with their cash as they should have been. Now we need to get off the main roads." I drove in silence for a few minutes, trying to think clearly. My phone was in the cup holder next to me. There was no way to reach it without them noticing. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "East," Jake said. "There's a network of back roads that'll get us to New Mexico without hitting major checkpoints." Lisa moved to the passenger seat beside me. Jake stayed standing, the gun never wavering from my direction. He occasionally checked the side mirrors, looking for police. "How much did you take?" I asked, trying to keep them talking, hoping it might make them see me as a person. "Enough," Lisa said. 217,000. It was supposed to be our fresh start." Jake shot her an angry look. "Shut up. He doesn't need to know anything." We drove for another hour, deeper into increasingly remote territory. The paved road gave way to gravel, then dirt. My RV wasn't made for this kind of terrain. Every bump made me wince, both from concern for my vehicle and fear that Jake might accidentally pull the trigger. Around 3 p.m., a gas station appeared, just a single weathered building with 2 ancient pumps out front. A faded sign read, "Last stop gas and convenience." "We need fuel," I said, noticing my gauge was getting low. "And I need to use the bathroom." Jake seemed to debate internally before nodding. "Fine. I'll go in with you to pay. Lisa will watch the RV. Don't try anything." He tucked the gun into his waistband, covering it with his t-shirt. As we pulled up to the pump, he leaned close to me. Remember, one word to anyone and Lisa will pay for it. I won't hesitate. Understand?" I nodded, my mouth dry. Inside the station, an elderly man sat behind the counter reading a paperback. The place smelled of beef jerky and dust. While Jake was distracted looking at a map on the wall, I asked to use the bathroom. The moment the door closed behind me, I pulled out my phone. I'd managed to grab it without them noticing when Jake was getting out of the RV. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. "911, what's your emergency?" a woman's voice answered. "I've been kidnapped," I whispered as quietly as possible. "I'm at a gas station called Last Stop, somewhere east of Williams. I'm being held at gunpoint by a couple who robbed a casino in Vegas. They're forcing me to drive my RV. Please help me." "Sir, can you stay on the line?" "No, I can't. They'll notice. My RV is a white Winnebago Mini Winnie, Arizona plate number THX 1138. We're heading east on back roads. Please hurry." I ended the call, deleted it from my recent calls list, and flushed the toilet for effect before rejoining Jake. Back in the RV, Jake seemed increasingly paranoid. He kept checking the mirrors, jumping at every sound. Lisa was quieter now, her earlier friendliness completely gone. As the sun began to set, the desert landscape transformed. Any other time, I would have found the deep oranges and purples beautiful. Now they just marked another hour I'd been held captive. We turned onto an even smaller dirt road, barely more than a trail. The RV rocked violently over the uneven terrain. Jake had me cut the headlights, making it nearly impossible to see where we were going. "There's a dry riverbed about 2 miles up," he instructed. "We'll stop there for the night." My heart sank. Night in the desert, miles from anywhere, at the mercy of 2 desperate criminals. I didn't like my chances. Just as we were approaching the riverbed Jake had mentioned, I saw them, headlights in the distance behind us, bouncing along the same dirt road. "Shit," Jake hissed, spotting them too. "Who the hell would be out here?" His voice had a new edge of panic. "Maybe locals?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. Could it be the police already? I hadn't expected them to find us so quickly, especially on these back roads. "Pull off the road," Jake shouted. "Now." Cut the engine. I veered right, driving about 50 yards into the desert before stopping behind a large rock formation that would hide us from the road. Jake made me kill the lights and engine. We sat in tense silence as the headlights grew closer. Through the windows, I could make out the outline of a police cruiser moving slowly along the dirt road, a spotlight sweeping the terrain. "They found us," Lisa whispered, turning to Jake with wide eyes. "How did they find us?" Jake's face contorted with fury. He turned to me, pressing the gun against my temple. "What did you do?" he demanded. "When did you call them?" "I didn't," I lied, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. "Maybe someone at the gas station reported suspicious activity. I don't know." The police cruiser stopped on the road, its spotlight methodically scanning the desert. It was about 100 yards away, but in the clear desert air, that wasn't far. "We need to run," Lisa said. "We can grab the money and head into the desert. They don't know exactly where we are." Jake shook his head. "No, they'll have helicopters soon. Our best chance is the RV." He jabbed the gun harder against my head. "You're going to drive us out of here. There's another road about a mile east that connects back to a state highway." Before I could respond, the spotlight from the cruiser found us. The beam of light illuminated the interior of the RV like a lightning strike. Everything happened so fast after that. The cruiser's siren chirped once, and a voice on a loudspeaker ordered, "Occupants of the white RV, this is the Arizona State Police. Exit the vehicle with your hands visible." Jake cursed, pulling me from the driver's seat. "You're my shield," he growled. dragging me toward the RV door with the gun pressed to my ribs. Lisa was frantically stuffing bundles of cash into her backpack. "Jake, don't. Let's just surrender." "No way. I'm not going to prison," he shouted back. He forced me to open the door. As soon as it swung open, the spotlight hit us directly. I was temporarily blinded. "Release the hostage and drop your weapon," the officer commanded through the loudspeaker. Jake responded by firing a shot over the cruiser. The sound was deafening in the desert silence. What happened next is still a blur in my memory. The officer returned fire. I felt Jake jerk behind me, heard him gasp. His grip on me loosened, and I instinctively dropped to the ground. More shots rang out. I crawled away from the RV, desperate to get clear of the gunfire. I heard Lisa screaming, more shouting from the officer, and then another police siren in the distance. When I finally looked up, Jake was on the ground beside the RV, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. The officer had taken cover behind his cruiser door, guns still trained on the scene. Lisa emerged from the RV with her hands up, sobbing. Within minutes, 3 more police vehicles arrived. Officers swarmed the area, securing Jake and Lisa, checking the RV, and finally helping me to my feet. A female officer wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. I hadn't even realized I was shaking. "You're safe now," she assured me. "The 911 dispatcher was able to track your call and approximate your route. We got lucky finding you so quickly." I learned later that Jake had been hit in the shoulder, not life-threatening. Both he and Lisa were taken into custody. The money they'd stolen was recovered from the RV. The police took me to a motel in Winslow, where I gave my statement. They told me Jake and Lisa had robbed a cash room at a small Vegas casino 3 days earlier. They'd already been identified from security footage, which is why they needed a different vehicle. That was 3 weeks ago. My RV had a broken window and a bullet hole in the side panel, but insurance is covering the repairs. I'm staying with my sister in Phoenix until I feel ready to travel again, if I ever do. I keep thinking about how quickly it all happened. 1 minute, I was being a good Samaritan. The next, I had a gun to my head. Every car I see on the side of the road now makes my stomach clench with fear. The police told me I did everything right, cooperating until I found a safe moment to call for help. But I don't feel like I did anything right. I feel stupid for stopping in the first place, for not seeing the warning signs, for almost getting myself killed. I haven't driven since that day. I'm not sure when I'll be able to get behind the wheel again without seeing Jake's face in the rearview mirror, holding that gun. Maybe never. Every night when I close my eyes, I'm back in that RV, feeling the gun against my temple, hearing Jake's breathing behind me, wondering if I'll live to see morning. I don't know how to make these feelings stop. I don't know how to feel safe again. That's my story. A simple act of kindness that almost cost me everything. Sometimes I wish I'd just driven past them that day, left them standing by their fake broken-down car in the Arizona sun. But then I remember what my dad taught me about helping others, and I wonder, how do you keep being a good person in a world where that might get you killed?